Please be upstanding for His Honourable the Mayor and Deputy Mayor.
Please be seated. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Council. My name is Councillor Adrian Mather. I'm the Mayor of Wokingham and I will chair this meeting. Before we start this evening, I would like to take a moment to say a few words about our dear friend and fellow councillor, Councillor Paul Fishwick, who very sadly passed away this week. Paul was an exemplary councillor, inside and outside council, and before and after he became the executive member for active travel, transport and highways. He worked tirelessly for the residents, councillors and the council. He was supremely professional with a humble and approachable personality. Our thoughts and our prayers are with Paul's family. I will be inviting councillors to pay tribute to Paul in a few moments. I would now like to ask councillors and everyone here present to stand and join me to observe a minute's silence to remember Paul and reflect on his immeasurable contribution to the borough, local people and every one of us in this chamber. Thank you very much. Please take your seat. Thank you. Before we start the business set out in the agenda, I would like to go through a few preliminaries. Please note that the meeting is currently being webcast live. There are no fire drills planned this evening. If the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building via the nearest exit and gather at muster point 2, which is located in the car park at the rear of the building. A reminder that members do need to stand when speaking in the chamber. Can members ensure that their nameplate is clearly displayed in front of you? May I remind everyone that I intend to adhere strictly to the timings set out in the Constitution. I would like to remind members to be mindful to speak directly into their microphones when speaking. If members turn away from the microphone, the sound will not be picked up for online attendees. Firstly, are there any apologies for absence?
There are Councillor Ashwell, Councillor Rowland, Councillor Ian Venner, Councillor de Jong.
Thank you very much. Pauline, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just could I apologise on behalf of Councillor Moses Ian Gumwena, who's ill.
Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. May I sign the minutes of the annual council meeting held on the 24th of October 2024 as a correct record? May I have a show of hands for? Thank you. Against? Abstentions? Thank you very much. The minutes are agreed. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Does anyone wish to declare an interest? Greg and David. Thank you. Could you put your hands down, please? Stephen, would you like to start, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My declaration of interest is the normal one. I have to declare an interest as a member of the board of Wokingham Borough Council Holdings Limited.
Thank you. Prue, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you. Similarly to Stephen, I'm a non-executive director of WBC Holdings, and it's item 72 that we're declaring an interest in. Thank you.
And Greg, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to declare an interest in the same item, which is item 72, as I'm directly now employed by a council-owned company, Optalis.
Thank you very much, Greg.
And I'll leave the room.
Thank you. And David, please.
Thank you, and I'm also a non-executive director of Optalis, which is item 72.
Thank you, everyone. Mayor's announcements. I attended the Me Too Club fundraiser, and this is a charity that does a lot of good work with children and families, and I didn't really appreciate that this local charity supports families whether or not they have a diagnosis for their children. I'm aware that some charities, perhaps due to overload, only support where there is a diagnosis, but Me Too Club tries to assist families with or without a diagnosis. I recently attended the Wokingham Community Awards 2024 and gave out 10 awards, including to local charity 52 Lives and Sue Jackson from Wokingham in Need. Well done to all the winners this year for an outstanding year of contributing to our community. Thank you. At a recent event, I bumped into Sally, who is the CEO of Cowshed, and she said that that tiny charity started 7 years ago has now got 350 volunteers. So she invited myself and the Deputy Mayor, Carol, to see their whole operation, which is frankly astonishing. The charity, they have a CRM system, and the charity has now helped over 30,000 local families since its inception. Another example of the work they do, recently, with 2 days' notice, Cowshed set up 250 packages of clothes, trainers, toiletries for asylum seekers. These people have literally no belongings at all, and the anecdotal stories which were given to the Cowshed representatives show the distress of coming from war-torn and broken states where hunger and brutal deaths are normalised. Thank you, Cowshed, for all the amazing work you do. That concludes my announcements. I would now like to invite my fellow councillors to pay tribute to Councillor Paul Fishwick. I have a list of... I will call on each of you in turn. First of all, the Leader of the Council, Stephen Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure everyone in this council chamber will want to join me in sending heartfelt condolences to Paul's wife, Leslie, and his children and grandchildren. We have lost a colleague and a friend, but they have had taken from them a much-loved husband, father, and grandfather. Our thoughts and prayers are with them at this most difficult of times. Paul's life was one of unswerving and selfless public service. He worked as a highways officer in Surrey, and then in retirement rededicated himself to the community as a parish and borough councillor for Winnersh. When the current administration was formed in 2022, Paul was a natural choice for an executive position. To reflect his interests and commitments, the old highways brief was renamed Active Travel, Transport and Highways. Paul had the political courage to take tough decisions as an executive member because he believed that doing the right thing for the long-term interests of the people of the borough was more important than seeking short-term popularity. He was respected across the council at Wokingham for his expert knowledge of the local highways network. At question time in the council chamber, he provided impressively full and well-informed answers and was never, in my recollection, wrong-footed. In his dealings with council officers, elected councillors and members of the public, Paul was unfailingly polite, courteous and helpful. All of us who were fortunate enough to work with him closely appreciated both his humour and his cool head in a crisis. The respect in which he was held is reflected in the generous messages I have received over the last week from officers and councillors of all parties here at Wokingham and in other councils, notably Reading and Bracknell. He was liked and admired well beyond our borough. Paul's untimely departure from our lives has naturally left many of us feeling deeply bereft. All of us in the Liberal Democrat councillor group feel his loss acutely. For his friends on the council, however, there is a positive that we are determined to cling on to. The best way we can honour Paul is to carry on his good work and be inspired by his sense of public service. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Stephen. Pauline, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was very, very sorry to hear that Paul had died, and I know this will be a terrible time for his family. On behalf of the Conservative group, I wanted to send our best wishes and condolences to his loved ones at this very difficult time. It's a very tragic loss to the council, the Liberal Democrat group and the wider community. I know Paul will be very much missed by all the councillors and officers he worked with. He was very diligent, polite, professional, but he also had a great sense of humour, and we recognise that from all sides of the council. He was so dedicated to his role, which was not an easy one, right up to the end, and clearly had given much of his life to local government. The minute's silence has given us an opportunity for all councillors to reflect on his life.
Thank you, Pauline. Rachel Burgess, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We would also like to express our sincere condolences to Paul's family. In our group, we had such great respect for Paul. He was held in high esteem by us all for his competence, his commitment to his role, and his desire to make improvements for our residents, but also for his generous, warm and genuine nature. We're so very sorry to hear of his death. He's a great loss to our borough, to this council and to this chamber. And in this chamber, as our former group member Andy Croy recently reminded me, and he's up here this evening out of a mark of respect for Paul, Paul first came to our attention as a member of the public asking questions at council. We knew him as the Lib Dem lamppost guy. And little did we know that the Lib Dem lamppost guy was going to transform into such a fantastic example to all of us. Paul gave willingly of his time and his expertise. He actually joined us on a speedwatch session in Norrie's ward. The session started at 7:30, but even with such an early start, Paul was as cheerful and as engaged as ever. At the session, some residents stopped to chat and possibly to have a little bit of a moan about, and I quote, whoever is in charge at the council. However, those residents were treated to all of Paul's best councillor qualities. He was sympathetic, he was professional, he was kind. I also know Paul made so many site visits to all of our wards. and spent many hours doing his best for our residents, and his efforts will always be appreciated by all of us. But of course, as much as we will all miss him, both professionally and personally, our loss cannot compare to that of his friends and family, and it's his family and his friends that we are keeping in our thoughts at this terrible time for them.
Thank you, Rachel. Adrian Betteridge, please.
Thank you. Paul richly deserves all the tributes being made this evening. I wanted to highlight something I found special about Paul. Paul was undoubtedly knowledgeable about our borough's roads, surface treatments, safety, and many other things, but he was truly passionate about equality of opportunity, making it easier and safer to travel by bus, by bike and by foot. Paul was even thinking hard about how we build e-scooters into the mix, should they become legal. He lived by these principles as well, travelling far afield across the borough to help us campaign, often by bus and more recently on his e-bike, which he loved. I'd often cycle home with Paul after council meetings, and he'd delight in his e-bike's ability to leave me behind when he turned left down Shoot End, and I'd frantically chase after him when his e-bike reached its speed limit and I at last had a chance to catch him up. He was a principled politician with a clear vision for what he wanted to do with his role. He's been a role model for me and many of us, and we will miss him dearly. Thank you.
Catherine Glover, please.
I was devastated to hear that Paul Fishwick had died. From my first meeting with Paul, when collecting a yellow Lib Dem polo shirt from him, to my last conversation with him on the phone about traffic calming and speed limits, he was always friendly, courteous and supportive. His knowledge of the highways remit was of course legendary, and his patience with the complete novice seemingly inexhaustible. Campaigning with Paul was always fun. When canvassing, he would often spot road abrasion or potholes and make a note of them. And of course, he would always admire the places where they had recently been fixed. An abiding memory of Paul will be, for me, his absolute delight in getting a Lib Dem stake board up near the Swallowfield polling station. I, like so many others, will miss Paul as a friend, fellow Lib Dem, and the executive member for Active Travel, Transport and Highways. And I send my condolences to his wife Leslie and his family and friends.
Jane Ainsley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I haven't been as councillor for as long as many of my colleagues, but felt compelled to speak as Paul has been such an important part of my journey. An unwavering presence through my election campaign, Paul was often by my side in Westcott, canvassing with me and offering much needed encouragement. His wisdom and guidance were invaluable, especially when it came to my own casework inquiries. Despite his incredibly busy schedule, Paul always made time to offer thoughtful, patient advice, and I will be forever grateful for his support as I settled into my role. Paul was an inspirational councillor and a great role model. In approaching my own role, I strive to embody the qualities that Paul demonstrated so effortlessly: his dedication, patience, and genuine care for those he worked with and those he supported. His example has set a high standard, and I will always aspire to handle my responsibilities with the same strength, kindness, integrity, and commitment that Paul showed. My thoughts are with his family and loved ones at this difficult time.
Shahid Yunus, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Today, dear fellow councillors, today we gather not as members of opposing parties, but as united council and community mourning the loss of one of our own, Councillor Paul Fishwick. His passing reminds us that our lives are like a candle in the wind, inherently fragile, transient, and can be extinguished by a sudden gust of wind or changes beyond our control. While I did not know Paul very well, but in my every interaction, I found him kind, courteous, and committed to public service. Even in the moments when debates in this chamber grew heated and emotions were running high, Paul remained a steady presence, calm, thoughtful, and composed. These qualities, rare as they are, earned him deep respect across the political divide. As we reflect on Paul's legacy, it is time for introspection for our own paths. How will we be remembered when our time here is over? Will we be remembered for our titles and affiliations, or for the compassion, service, and integrity we brought to our roles? Paul's example serves as a powerful reminder that our true impact lies not in personal victories, but in how we serve our residents, how through our policies and decisions we add value to their lives, and how we uplift our communities we are entrusted to represent. As we look around the chamber, the portraits of the past mayors are a silent reminder of the fleeting nature of our time here. We are but temporary custodians of these seats, chosen to serve with purpose and care. One day we too will leave, and what will remain as a legacy we have built. Paul's passing is a call to action for all of us, to focus on the shared mission that binds us all, and that is to serve our residents to the best of our abilities. Let this be inspiration for us to elevate our collective efforts, building a legacy defined not just by the policies we enact, but by the humanity we show along the way. Councillor Paul Fishwick, may you rest in peace. May God bless your soul and bring comfort to your loved ones during this very difficult time.
Thank you, Shahid. Prue Bray, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This has been a very difficult week trying to find the right words to write about Paul. I thank everybody for their tributes to him tonight, as well as everybody in this chamber, the officers who are not present, who worked with him. All the groups that he is associated with have all sent their condolences. The parish council, we had a minute's silence for him on Tuesday night. The Joint Waste Disposal Board have sent their condolences. He was a member of that. And we are planning to celebrate Winnersh Station's birthday on the 10th of January as part of Rail 200. And the rail partnership are devastated by the fact that he is not going to be there on something he had been working on so hard. I feel awful. His family, he loved his family, his wife Leslie. It is a really difficult time for them. I hope that they're watching this. Leslie said she would be looking online. They can take some comfort from the fact that Paul was appreciated by his friends and colleagues. He was a thoroughly decent human being. He dedicated his life to public service. He was always cheerful. I think that word was invented for him. I just find it really hard to know I will never see him eat another Mars bar. I will never see him cycling up the Reading Road again in his high-vis jacket. I won't be able to ask him about surface dressings, and I won't be able to ask him about cloud formations, because he also is a man who's very, very interested in weather from a child. He has a weather station in his garden, and as well as being very interested in active travel and transport, was also a strong proponent of taking action on climate change. I think Stephen put it well, we should carry on his legacy. We know that he dedicated his life to that public service, and if we can all do that, I think it's a good way to remember him. I feel lucky to have known him.
Thank you, Prue. We now move on to public question time. Please, I would like to remind executive members that responses to questions must be no longer than 2 minutes, and these will be timed. I think today we have just one public question. Mr. Thomas, would you like to press the button and ask your question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everybody. Over the past couple of years, I've noticed a general decline in maintenance across several areas in Wokingham town centre. For example, residents had to clear overgrown weeds themselves around the old library area, and Goatley Way off of Peach Street shows visible issues with weeds and litter. Additionally, overflowing bins and increase of litter around the town centre have led to various sightings of rats, quite large rats, I have to say. Our town, once celebrated for its beauty and cleanliness, with award-winning upkeep, now feels neglected. This decline in litter collection, street cleaning and general maintenance may deter visitors, potentially impacting our local economy. Does the council see street maintenance as a priority, and what steps are being taken to address these issues in upkeep and pest control?
There we go. Thank you very much for your question, John. Street cleaning is very much still a priority within our town centres, and we continue to work with colleagues and our partners to address concerns when they arise. In terms of Wokingham Town Centre, we have a street cleaning operative who works within the town centre throughout the week, as well as daily mechanical sweeping and litter bin emptying of the main areas. As you would expect, the schedules and routines are reassessed to ensure that our frequencies of cleaning regime reflect any changes or new activity identified in our town centres. Wokingham Town has also been very successful and won many awards for Britain in Bloom, which considers the cleanliness of the area as a factor. We have checked reports within the town centre, and we can see on the occasion where glass or litter that were reported to the council were quickly dealt with within the timeframes that we hold to in terms of our standards. We do note that Goatley Way has experienced some issues recurring with litter and rubbish on adjacent private lands, which the council is not legally responsible to clear. However, we will continue to liaise with the landowners to resolve this. Any fly tipping beside the litter bins also appears to be related to private, commercial or household rubbish, which can be easily taken to the RE-free waste recycling centres. Furthermore, we have and will continue to target those irresponsible individuals that litter or fly tip through the antisocial behaviour team and enforce where suitable and raise these issues directly if there is adequate evidence or material.
Mr. Thomas, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, please. Thank you, Jordan. In addition to the decline in general maintenance tasks around our town centre, I also note various properties that have become total eyesores. Two examples I have are the vacant bingo hall, or Curves Gym building on East Hampstead Road, and the second example is the Crisis House building opposite Wokingham Station. Buildings such as these, in my view, are dragging down the overall aesthetics of Wokingham Town Centre, and I strongly believe the local authority has a responsibility to ensure required measures are put in place. I would like to ask, please, what our local authority can do to encourage, or indeed strongly encourage, commercial property owners to play their own part in the general upkeep of our town by following agreed standards for buildings and ground conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much again, John. As with issues of individual properties that you feel are being kept in a manner that's bringing down the maintenance of the area and the general enjoyment of the town centre and areas beyond, we would encourage you to come into contact with the council's either environment team or antisocial behaviour team, or depending if the property is council owned, directly with housing or anything further. and we can work on those on an individual case-by-case basis. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the public questions. Mr. Thomas, you are welcome to stay for the remainder of the meeting, but please can I ask you to view the meeting from the public gallery upstairs if you wish to stay. Now we come on to petitions. Does anybody wish to submit a petition? Okay. Now we move on to item 65, presentation by Thames Valley Police, Crime Commissioner and Chief Constable Jason Hogg and Police and Crime Commissioner Matthew Barber. We anticipate 35 minutes for this, with approximately 10 minutes for questions. I would like to extend a warm welcome to the Chief Constable, Jason Hogg, and Matthew Barber, the Police and Crime Commissioner, who will be jointly presenting this item. Over to you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, if I can begin with a very quick overview and a highlight of some of the areas that as Police and Crime Commissioner I've been working on. I'll hand over to the Chief Constable, who has the full PowerPoint slide and no doubt a much more interesting operational update, which everybody always wants to get into. I have, over the summer, launched the new Police and Crime Plan, which hopefully members will have seen, because we've shared some publicity on that. Broadly speaking, that sets the priorities for the force, the objectives that I'm asking the Chief Constable to look at, and it broadly falls into three areas: protecting our communities, protecting people, and protecting property. The first of those is in many ways very much the overarching one. So it's about focusing on neighbourhood policing in particular. I know that will come up in the questions today. Since I appointed the Chief Constable about 18 months ago now, we have had a shared vision of increasing neighbourhood policing across Thames Valley. That obviously doesn't happen overnight, but good progress being made to double the number of neighbourhood officers, and as resources allow, I want to go further on that where possible, because neighbourhood policing really is the bedrock of so much of the other work that is needing to be done. Key to all of the areas, but critical to protecting communities, is crime prevention. That's partly why you need that strong neighbourhood policing presence, but actually it's a really important thing to remind everybody that's what the police are there to do. Often we focus on just catching people when things have gone wrong. And that's often the much more exciting bit. That makes much better headlines, but what is often a lot more dull and boring is preventing crime from taking place in the first place. And so a real focus on that. Clearly a large piece of work for the police, but also through my office and working with organisations such as yourselves, so through our community safety partnerships and the wider work that we can do. There's an awful lot about particularly early intervention, whether that's around the areas of very serious concern, such as knife crime and youth violence, through to other areas where education is key. And one of the projects that my office is working on at the moment, we have a fantastic youth worker with a really good education background, who I've seen in action in his former life as a youth worker. He's doing some work with us at the moment, mapping all of the interventions that the police have within schools, and looking at pulling that together in a much more strategic way, because what you will see is that often a neighbourhood team might well go and visit a school. I was up in Buckinghamshire earlier today, and there's one of the PCSOs going off to give a presentation to schools, but alongside that, our violence prevention partnership will also go and do interventions in schools. Roads policing will do inputs around road safety, and often we're not coordinating that effort as a force, and we're not coordinating properly with schools. So what I want to have as a result of that is a really clear plan that sets out for each sort of age group of 2 or 3 years through school. We know that we can be pretty much guarantee that every child within that age group are going to get these inputs from the police and our partners during their time at school in an age-appropriate fashion, whereas at the moment it's a little bit more hit and miss. Within that area of protecting communities, we also look an awful lot at antisocial behaviour. Again, big overlap with local authorities. Antisocial behaviour in its truest sense, rather than what most people will describe as antisocial behaviour, is that stuff that falls below the criminal threshold, and therefore often it is the local authority and the housing associations who have a role to play. We've just launched a new mediation service which started in Buckinghamshire, has now been rolled out across Thames Valley, which the police now have access to refer into, as well as local authorities and housing associations. That is proving really powerful already at dealing with some of those long-running neighbourhood disputes. Because when we think of antisocial behaviour, often they are prolonged, enduring problems, and there isn't necessarily going to be a criminal justice sanction. They are neighbours, they are residents living near each other who have fallen out, for want of a better term, and actually it is that mediation which is the long-term solution. So that is just launched this year, but showing some really positive early signs from their work. Second area is in many ways the much more serious end of policing, the sorts of things that generally at meetings like this people often don't ask the questions about. They're not the things that are on the front, in the front of everybody's minds all the time, because thankfully they will affect a relatively small number of people. But they are the crimes against the person, the rapes, the sexual assaults, the domestic abuse, the serious violence, the child exploitation, the really serious end of policing, which we should all be concerned about in public life. Thankfully, they will affect a minority of your residents, and most people won't be directly impacted or concerned about them. But domestic abuse, for example, is the biggest single crime type that any of the officers locally in your borough will be dealing with on a daily basis. It is a huge challenge for policing to deal with, but the scale of it is something that most people don't necessarily recognise. And it is, of course, as far as women are concerned, in the risk of violence, the biggest risk that women will be at from violence is in their own homes by someone they know. Yet, conversely, of course, the biggest fear is often around what's happening outside the nighttime economy, etc. So there's a balance there to be struck between the way that area is policed. So some really good work that the Chief Constable focuses on around domestic abuse, improving the investigations and outcomes for rape and sexual offences, but also looking at that work in the nighttime economy. And Thames Valley Police, the Chief Constable and I were up in Parliament talking to some of our MPs recently with some of our sniffer dogs, who do some fantastic work. We believe the first in the world, certainly the first in the country. We're saying the first in the world confidently, of these dogs that are trained to sniff out date rape drugs, being used increasingly in the nighttime economy, being used at some of the festivals and large events, and that's certainly a programme that I'm hopeful that we can expand further. And the final area is around protecting property. And this is much more, if you might think, the volume crime, the area that people will be much more concerned about. With a declining risk, I think it is fair to say, if I talk to most people, their biggest concern about where they might become victims of crime is about burglary. And burglary is historically low. That is undoubtedly, in recent years, caused by the fact that more people are living at home. And that's fine by me. I don't really care. I'm not trying to claim credit for falling burglary. I just don't want people to get burgled. So if it's because people are working from home, that's fine as far as I'm concerned. But even pre-pandemic, we saw burglary levels in Thames Valley falling to levels not seen before since sort of the 1970s. And it's fallen further since then. So, and you'll see that reflected in your local figures here. But it remains a really important crime, because if it does happen, it can have a huge impact on individuals and families. And that's why the Chief Constable continues to have a target of officers attending every domestic burglary. And I think that's a really important message to get across, because it's one of those areas that you could be forgiven for believing what you read in the press, that the police don't even bother turning up to burglaries anymore. And that is definitely not the case in Thames Valley. We're also doing a lot more around rural crime. Retail crime is really important. I know there'll be some questions on that later, but it's an area of focus that I've certainly asked the force to look at over the last year or so. We launched a retail crime strategy in January. Earlier this year, I came and spoke to some businesses here in Wokingham. I'm very happy to update on some of the work that we're doing around there, but significant increases in charges for retail crime. That is really starting to have an impact, hopefully, in building confidence for retailers, as well as holding criminals to account. The final area, which I'll touch on before handing over to the Chief, is is again one of those that we haven't really got to grips with yet as a society, not just the police, and that's around cybercrime and fraud. It is probably the biggest single risk to all of us. You know, most people might have some concern about whether they'll get home, and as I say, their house has been burgled, really unlikely to happen. Will you be safe walking home from this meeting tonight? Yes, you almost certainly will. Can I be quite as confident that you won't get home and find some money's been taken from your bank account, or you've got a phishing email in your inbox? No, that's a much greater risk, although the level of harm may be considered to be a lot less. And it's something that's really challenging for a territorial police force like Thames Valley Police to deal with. So there is a lot of work nationally, and Thames Valley Chief Constable is responsible for the regional organised crime unit, who will take a lead on some of that work regionally, but nationally working with other agencies such as the Cybersecurity Centre, with the National Crime Agency. There's a lot of work to be done around prevention, but also trying to bring those investigations together to allow policing to have the best chance of identifying those responsible. Clearly, we're unlikely to see a situation where Thames Valley Police are going to have much impact on some of those national or international threats that are happening overseas. But what we can do is target harden our own communities, our own businesses and our own residents, and allow the police to focus on those criminals who are acting within our geography, who continue to pose a threat. That's a very quick overview of the police and crime plan that I've set, but I'll hand over to the Chief to give a more detailed operational update on what we've got now. Very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Matthew. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about our people in Thames Valley Police, neighbourhood policing, and some of the changes in our force restructure. And if I have time, about contract management and time it takes for us to answer the phone. Then I'll hand over to Andy, who's the local police commander, for walking me here to talk about some local issues and crime levels. What we have done in the past year through working with Matthew, I want Thames Valley Police to be a very open and transparent organisation. If you want to know what happens in relation to your local area with crime, we publish it all on Matthew's website now regularly, so people can have up-to-date and accurate information. So I have a lot of slides, and if whoever's got the clicker, can you just do the best to keep up with what I'm going to say? Challenge. Thames Valley Police is bigger than ever before. We have 9,200 officers and staff and special constables, which sounds very positive, and it is. Despite that, when it comes to officer numbers, when the population has increased so much in the Thames Valley since 2010, there are less officers per 100,000 population, with many challenges. Despite what sometimes when you watch these police dramas on the television, 48% of my workforce are female, 45% of all new student officers are female. We're working incredibly hard to be a very diverse employer. 16% of our new recruits were from our ethnic minority communities last year, but we're working really, really hard, because I do believe that diversity is important, and we need to be representative of our communities as well. I was reminded by my colleague here from the media. I was asked a question last year: what keeps you awake at night? And last year I'd forgotten, I'd said recruitment, and that is no longer something I worry about. We've worked incredibly hard. We currently have no police officer vacancies. We had several hundred last year. There are some departments I found it difficult to attract people into, and we've made real improvements in increasing more PCSOs and those in our contact management centres, our police staff. We've had to do that by increasing the pay of some of our police staff to be more competitive, to retain people, some of which are relatively low paid. And there is a reality here that we will have to retain good people, we will have to have less of them in order to increase salaries to be competitive here in the southeast. But I'm delighted in terms of my recruitment at the moment. We are, and some of our new entry routes, we've got a new detective entry route, which I've been giving out some awards this evening, and attracting people with career changes, social workers, teachers, a vet, and I've just recently given an award to, who are interested in joining the police but don't want to drive fast cars. They want to investigate rape, they want to investigate fraud, cybercrime, and some new entry routes, a different way of thinking to bring a fresh perspective into policing. Like all public sector organisations, we have some significant challenges around finances at the moment, and we're in the process of restructuring the whole organisation in order to make £20 million worth of savings. We, in effect, that is moving from 12 local policing areas to 5. That is allowing us to take out significant layers of management. So that is changing as we speak in terms of the implications here in Wokingham, rather than having Andy, who's currently the local police commander for Bracknell and Wokingham. As of May next year, we will have a new, what we're calling local command unit, Berkshire West. That will include Wokingham, Reading and West Berkshire. I'm taking a lot of care who to appoint to some of the new positions within that. Andy Graham, who many of you will know, will be responsible, who's the deputy here for Andy, will be in place looking after neighbourhood policing. And a lady called Felicity Parker, a new chief superintendent. She used to do Andy's job and knows the area very, very well, and know many of our local partners. Like I said, what that will allow us to do is save a great deal of money. It will also allow us to be more agile in moving resources around. There's probably not a significant amount of resources I'm going to have going forward, and it may actually have to less resources because of the financial challenges I have to face. Albeit I do receive very good support from Matthew, who wants to see more police officers on the streets. But what the having 5 areas will do, it will give us more resilience. And like I've said, we're by middle of next year, we will have doubled the number of neighbourhood police officers on the streets across Thames Valley, as well as having more detective in our child abuse and domestic abuse units as well, and doubling the number of school officers. There are tough choices, but I am confident this change we're making will protect those officers on the front line. And I've already receiving some good feedback in relation to from communities and seeing more police officers on the streets. So neighbourhood policing, it is at the heart of everything we do here in Thames Valley, and there is much that is going well. In the past year, officers in Thames Valley, we've arrested more criminals, we are solving more crime, we are charging more offenders. We are stopping searching more criminals and suspects on the street. We have the highest stop and search rate of any police force across the country. And as a result, knife crime here in the Thames Valley continues to fall and bucks the national trend. We've seen almost a 50% cut in homicide, which is in effect young men killing each other on the streets. As a result, a proactive approach, which is policing hotspot areas, use of stop and search, but also intervention through education, which is funded by our PCC's office as well. We're doing a great deal around shoplifting, and I talked a lot about shoplifting last year. Some of the feedback we were getting is shoplifting isn't a victimless crime, and there's obviously a strong link between shoplifting and antisocial behaviour, particularly on those off licences or supermarkets, small supermarkets open late. Andy, as your local area commander, has been very proactive in this area, regularly running local operations. In relation to neighbourhood policing, when I speak to communities, what do you want? They want, usually this is what people say to me, they want us to answer the phone quickly. They want us to respond quickly when they need us for help. They want the officers to be proactive in carrying out inquiries and using their powers, early arrest of offenders, and keeping victims of crime updated. And then they say, we just want to see you. We want you to be visible in our communities. We want to know that you understand our priorities and see our officers taking action. And I've been with our 300 top leaders today in the organisation, and what I tell our leaders all the time, our communities want to see police officers and staff using their powers on the streets. I hear that all the time. I never hear, I wish we'd see you less, or I wish you wouldn't arrest criminals. And that is what we are absolutely focused on here in the Thames Valley. And I will probably just touch now on contact management and call handling times. I do get sometimes, I wish you would pick the phone up quicker. I did check before we came in today. Our call handling is good, actually, at the moment. What I've said to Matthew, though, is I could take more officers off the streets and get them to answer the phone quicker. I'm not sure that's what our communities want. So we're investing significantly in technology. Another first in the world, and it is first in the world, and it's an American company we're working with. Traditionally, we receive 220,000 calls a year from people who want an update on their crime, victims of crime, or want to speak to the officer in the case for more information. we have built a victim web-based portal, so victims of crime can use an app to contact officers direct and having automatic updates on crime. So when an officer writes in our system an update, that immediately goes to a victim of crime. That has already shown 70,000 less calls into our contact centres a year and a 15% improvement in victim satisfaction. And we've got a significant amount of robotic processes in place as well, which is reducing the time it takes to get information to the public and more to do there. I'll pause there and hand over to Andy to talk a little bit about some of the issues affecting people locally and what he's doing with the local officers, particularly the neighbourhood teams.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. Excuse me. If we move to the slide with the figures on, if we can. This is Wokingham LPA, which is a few in. I'll just start with some of the figures. There's a good news story here, because you see a lot of minuses there in terms of against a number of key crime areas, which is a testament really to the efforts of my teams out on the grounds. We've seen a reduction in crime overall for the Wokingham area, as the Chief has said. I cover Wokingham and Bracknell, but this is specific to the Wokingham area. A 10.9% reduction. And overall outcome, i.e. we have a sanction of some description against somebody, is at 14.3% for the last year, which is an increase from the previous year. But I want more, of course. So again, we push for officers to seek that kind of outcome, and obviously the victim satisfaction that then brings when somebody has a sanction against them. I'll cover some of the kind of crime types here. So domestic abuse, as Matthew has mentioned, that's down 4.1%. And again, that's not just because of policing, that's to do with the community safety partnership work that goes on, the different streams within that support those victims of crime. But we're seeing an increase from the figure there of 8.9. For the last month, it was 10.7. We've had a positive outcome in that particular area. And as I say, it's one of the biggest areas of crime we have in Wokingham and Bracknell area. Residential burglary, I won't touch on that much because it's already been spoken. It's down again. And we've got a good outcome rate at the moment. And we often know who our local people are who commit those crimes. And we strive hard to arrest those. We also get visited, especially here, because of some of the affluence in this area, for organised crime groups that come here. And they tackle some of the family gold. We just arrested some people that were actually living in one of the hotels in Bracknell, and they have been going around the country, staying at hotels, and specifically burgling people for their family gold. We've got those people now, and we've put them in custody, which is nice. So we've now got the work of pulling all that files together, and that evidence to hopefully secure a conviction and see them spend some time behind bars. Violence with injury, again, something Matthew talked about. It's down 5.3, but again, 18% outcome rate. Quite a lot of that is related to domestic abuse as well, because of that harm within the home that takes place. So again, a lot of work goes on there to protect people. One of the key things we've been using as well around domestic abuse is domestic violence protection orders, which is an order which prevents a perpetrator from using immediate or the threat of immediate violence towards a victim. It's a power I can authorise as a superintendent, which then goes within 48 hours to a court, and a court order for a 28-day period. That allows space for the victim to get assistance. So it helps with that decision-making around whether they want to end relationships, around non-molestation orders, etc. They're soon to be combined with a whole group of orders that will make it a lot easier, and actually the level of authorisation will be changing that as well. But we've gone from about 5 or 6 last year up to nearly 30 this year. So it's been a real good effort by the officers and the use of that power to prevent harm. Knife crime, as you can see there, that's actually at 13% as I look today. So again, a downward trend on what were already good figures. It's a very safe area here in Wokingham. Our work around the Serious Violence Partnership here in the Community Safety Partnership is very much around prevention. It's around getting into the schools, talking to the schools, and actually trying to educate young people around the need to not carry a knife, which often I heard some stuff on the news there about that. Many people carry a knife just because they fear that violence, when actually reality is very different, and often it becomes used upon them. Sexual offences, often a very challenging area for us to investigate, but we're having some reductions here. Part of that is also around kind of our volume, if you like, around sexual offences, is when children are sharing explicit images, not really understanding the threats, the risks around that. So it's very much about educating those particular people. And obviously, some of the challenges we have around sexual offences, often one word against the other. Real challenge around the kind of evidence side of things there. But what we do is encourage people to report. and we do see an increase in that reporting over time. That's lots of figures, of course. Some more just around some of the key crime areas, but then I'll go into some case studies, really, which just highlight some of the work we do locally. So again, I've talked about burglaries. I won't go into that much further. Vehicle crime, often the crime that impacts people because it stops them going to work, for example, if you have your tools stolen or if you've got your car stolen off your driveway. Again, there are some issues around some organised crime groups that were doing that, where they kind of scan the keyless car keys and then they take your car without you even knowing. We've done a lot of work across the region around that, and again, we've locked some people up in the last year that have been tackling that, which is why we've seen some of those reductions, because when we're doing things like arresting people and putting them in prison, people don't want to come here because the risks are too high. So actually that proactive work we do with the different teams I've got, a priority crime team and my tasking team across the police area, do a lot of that work and tackle those individuals. We've touched on shoplifting, but I've got a slide on that in a minute, just talking around some of the successes there, and just touch around bicycle theft as well. We do some work, quite a lot of work with the train station, because that's one of the hardest hit areas where people commute down to the train station, they come back and find they've got to walk home, which is obviously not what we want. So we do quite a lot of work with the BTP and the train station. I know I'm flying through some of those figures because they are what they are. They're figures, aren't they? Let's get into some of the detail of some of the stuff we've been doing. If we go to the next slide. So again, this is some of the work we're doing with our neighbourhood teams that have that real kind of impact and value locally within that community. This is around some work, as you can see there, around some drug dealing and the exploitation of vulnerable people. There are a couple of properties that were being cuckooed. People probably understand that, where people come in and they use that premises to actually commit their crimes from the community drugs line. Sorry, the county drugs lines, forgive me. And again, this was a London county drugs line that came in and started cuckooing some individuals. Part of that is pulling together information. Part of that comes from yourselves, where you're telling us about these things that are happening. Comes to the community about the issues there. We work with the antisocial behaviour team here in Wokingham, which is an excellent team. And as a result of that, we undertook a number of drugs warrants, actually enforcement around trying to arrest people with drugs in the house. We arrested people, charged people. We put support in around that vulnerable person. We've got authorities we can put in place around closure orders, so people can't actually start coming to that address. And ultimately, if we need to, we can actually close that premises down through some of the powers we have. That all links in then to visibility and reassurance patrols, and then engagement with the housing provider, because often it's people within social housing that get cuckooed. They take advantage of their vulnerabilities to do that. So collectively, working across those different agencies, we do an effective tackling of those issues. And you can see the outcomes there on the right-hand side. Forgive me for the acronym PWIT, which is possession with intent to supply, drug supply, essentially. One of those people remanded in custody. We put a closure order on the premises, which stops it dead because they can't actually deal from it, and it makes it much more difficult. But some, as I say, helping for that particular individual who was vulnerable. And obviously what comes with the kind of drug dealing is the antisocial behaviour, like the Chief just talked about, around the shoplifting, has a real positive impact on that local community. And we continue to do those enforcement and work closely with the local community around any information coming in to tackle it. Move then just around to retail theft. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. So retail theft, obviously this across Bracknell and Wokingham. I've kind of done a lot of work on this. One of the key things here is about how we work with the actual companies and businesses themselves and giving them the empowerment to report to us. There's still quite a lot of work we need to do on that. I've got a couple of officers now that are dedicated to this, linked into one of my sergeants, and we're tackling some of our most prolific offenders. I'm not going to go through all of these points up there, so if you just kind of read as I go through. Just as a bit of context, in October, we charged 5 people with 47 offences. So there's a small group of people that go and commit the biggest amount of crime. There's other offending going on as well, but we've been tackling those particular individuals. And also talking with the businesses about how they target harden, move certain items away from the doors. What does your security look like? How does your system, and Mr. Barber has put in place the DISC system, which allows us to share that data and information. So the sooner we get that data and information from the premises, the locations, the quicker we can tackle and get those individuals off of the streets. That's resulted in a number of criminal behaviour orders. So when someone's convicted of an offence, we can give them a criminal behaviour order, which often gets them locked up quicker than us charging them with shoplifting. I'm talking in reality here. That criminal behaviour order, for example, one of them was someone couldn't go onto a forecourt of a petrol station unless they are buying petrol. Now, it sounds a silly thing to say, but they would go onto the forecourt, they'd go into the shop and they would steal. They had no intention to buy any fuel, so they've been banned from doing that across the country. Not just Wokingham, that's the entire country. So again, I think we've already locked that person up once for a breach of that. So they are very effective in terms of tackling this. More to be done, because it's working with the retailers and making sure systems work and we get that information quickly, because sometimes the shops store up the reports and tell them us all at one time, and sometimes we release some of that evidence. There's a lot of work still to do on that, but we've had a significant impact and improvement. As already mentioned, that antisocial behaviour around those areas has also reduced. Moving on to, I know I'm talking fast, but let's try and get this information in so we go for some questions at the end. Antisocial behaviour around off-road bikes, and this touches a little bit on e-scooters as well. So the PCC provided some off-road electric bikes that our roads policing officers use. We've been utilising those now, not only here in Wokingham, but down in Bracknell as well, in the Crown Estate. And that's to tackle the antisocial use of scooters and, you know, the motorbikes, the dirt bikes. Op Kamikaze, I have no idea why we called it Kamikaze, but that was the name of the operation. But that ran in May and August, which typically are the times in the summers, the better weather in the evenings, really annoying the local residents with the buzz of the motorbikes going all evening. We did a lot of work around that, and we tackled a number of people around that. We seized vehicles under the Road Traffic Act for people with no insurance, gave out what are Section 59 warnings, which are about if you continue to behave in a manner that's antisocial with that particular vehicle, we will take it off of you. And as you can see, some of the results there. Linked into that is e-scooters. I'm sure I'm assuming there'll be a question later on, because often it's an emotive subject. You know, we're tackling the e-scooters as much as we can. We've done a number of operations during the summer. We've been out. We kind of start with, if you remember COVID, where we engaged, explained, etc. We do a bit of that, where we engage with someone, say, do you realise you shouldn't be doing this? And we give a warning letter, or we might seize them. We've done 18 warning letters, and I think I was saying to the Chief earlier, it was only about 2 or 3 seizures. I didn't get that right. There's 10 so far. So we're doing a bit of work, but there's a lot of stuff we can do potentially, aren't we, that we need to just think around that legislation side of this, because we can't fix this problem alone by enforcement. There needs to be some kind of look at what the legislation does and how that manages the kind of use of e-scooters, because they have a place potentially, but they probably need to be regulated. The other thing just around the e-scooters is we're doing a bit of work with the schools around educating people around the usage of them, and you'll see some stuff coming out soon around the Christmas campaign, because it's quite a nice present, isn't it, an e-scooter, but you don't necessarily see the small print that says, but you can't use it anywhere other than the private land. Most people haven't got private land big enough to do that. There you go. So just moving on to just some of the next slide, which is my final slide, and then I'm pretty much on time, I hope, which is just around kind of the shared learning. So it's been mentioned already, we don't do this alone. This is around working with our partners across the local authority. I've said around the CSP, but there's schools, there's the housing associations, all the kind of people that work together. And there's a number of kind of events just on the left-hand side there where we've worked together. White Ribbon campaign is around that domestic abuse and reducing domestic abuse and awareness. We're doing work around serious violence. We've got Positive Choices, which I know some of you from councillors I think have been involved in, which is an input we do to schools. We've got an event coming up in February next year, and we tackle the different levels of schools, school years, just talking around knife crime, around cyber crime, around the kind of things that people need to be aware of as they grow up, around social media, etc. There's some stuff here working along Prevent, which is around Martin's Law, which those of you who are aware is around come out of the Manchester Arena bombings, around responsibilities for people holding public events and what their responsibilities are. And we've done a lot of work around violence of women and girls. This is especially around domestic abuse within the home here across Wokingham and Bracknell. I will pause here because we're pretty much hitting 35 minutes. slides are here anyway for you to look at in more detail if you want, and I will pause and probably open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew, Jason and Andy. If you could now turn to questions from members. I actually have a list from Democratic Services of the questions, and the first question is from Yusra Salman. Sorry, Stephen.
I just thought before we move on to questions, Mr. Mayor, it might be appropriate for me to say, on behalf of the Council, a big thank you to Matthew and Jason and Andy for the presentation and for answering the questions you're about to be presented with. And I hope you might pass on to your officers our thanks for all the work they do to keep our borough safe. It's much appreciated. Thank you.
We have, I think, 13 minutes of this, 12 minutes of this item. So I'd like to go to the first question to Yusra Salman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is to the Police and Crime Commissioner, Mr. Matthew Barber. Residents in my ward raised safety hazard concerns during shopping in Woodley Prison over the electric scooter and electric bikes. It has been reported several times reckless riding by under the age of 14s, not wearing helmets at all, which poses dangers for themselves and pedestrians both. What strategy is implementing to prevent unforeseen accidents and educate our youth, including children at schools in Wokingham Borough, to raise awareness?
Thank you. I'm sure this won't be the only question on the subject of e-scooters. It's a problem across the force, not just in Woking, indeed across the country. I think the interesting point, clearly, the younger riders are, the not wearing the helmets is obviously of a concern. But actually, the clear message there should be that privately owned e-scooters are illegal for everybody. Regardless of age, regardless of whether you're wearing a helmet or not. There's not a you should wear a helmet when you're riding one. No, you just shouldn't be on it in the first place. And that's where the message is very simple. In some places there are grey areas around that where you have council schemes, which confuses it. But actually, the message can be quite clear cut to people. You've heard about some of the work that's been done in terms of enforcement. I was talking to BBC Berkshire about this morning. Just in the last month, 54 e-scooters were confiscated across the force. So that seizure work is certainly picking up pace. And I think that does send a pretty clear message to anybody who's forked out several £100s on one of these things. But you're absolutely right that the key bit is education. I absolutely believe that the police have a role in that, but I don't think that's entirely down to policing. I touched on earlier that piece of work we're doing through my office about the range of work that the police can do with schools. But there is a wider role for everybody, for local authorities, for schools themselves, ultimately for parents. Certainly, the Superintendent for Community Policing wrote to all schools across Thames Valley about a month or so ago. I was going to say at the start of term, so that would have been over a month or so ago now. It was at the start of term. Highlighting the risks and trying to make sure that the schools are on board with that. And there's some videos that are being developed as well to help teachers and parents to share that where some of the risks are. So clearly, when you've got children that young riding them, there is a clear concern about their own well-being, but actually it should be pretty clear-cut that nobody should be riding them anyway.
Caroline Smith, please.
Thank you. I'm continuing the subject here. At the last council meeting, attended by the Chief Constable and the Crime Commissioner on the 16th of November, I asked a question about e-bikes and scooters' use in Wokingham Borough. The reply given was that in the run-up to Christmas 2023, there would be a campaign specifically targeting parents to make them aware of the illegality of these machines on the road and pavement. Jason Hogg also stated your force would be proactive in prosecuting and taking scooters off the streets. Please can I have an update on how many prosecutions have been carried out? Thank you.
So, just building on from what Matthew has said, last year, certainly, both Matthew and I, we received more letters about e-scooters than any other issue. The challenge here is a prime example of a wider problem which the police are having to pick up in the absence of proper legislation. There needs to be some absolute clarity in our country whether we want to legalise e-scooters, e-bikes or not. The police do have an important enforcement role. Matthew has mentioned we've seized, this time last year we weren't seizing any. We seized 54 in the last month. We continue to do that. I'm not aware if we've prosecuted anybody for no insurance, but we do seize regularly. But I do think the public are confused about this. I was on patrol recently in West Berkshire. We got a call over the radio, seized an e-scooter from a young person. He seemed like a pretty decent kid, took him home to his parents. His parents weren't aware. They bought the e-scooter second hand. So I think there is some confusion amongst the public, and I would really welcome, and we have been discussing with the local MPs about getting the government to have a view on this, about what we're going to do, because it is a wider societal problem, and other countries are having the same challenges. What does one do around this? When powers are available, we absolutely will use them. But I think that the point I made last year as well is using the example of 13, 14-year-old children riding at speed without helmets. We are not going to be chasing them in our cars. Because it is far, far too risky for that, and I'm not prepared to put my officers in a situation where they would lose their livelihoods and be prosecuted. So this is a challenging issue. The police have a part to play, but it's a wider partnership issue, I think, to address this tricky problem.
Stephen Newton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is to the Chief Constable. Residents in the Whitegates part of my ward are routinely being impacted by people holding illegal car meets and races in Thames Valley Park. The noise spreads over a wide area, and where people have tried to intervene, I understand that they've been subject to threats and abuse. I have previously raised this with Thames Valley Police, but no real action has been forthcoming. I understand that there was about 5,000 people present at a recent meet. This impacts local residents, but also local businesses and organisations, including Wokingham Waterside Centre, and people from all over the area who want to enjoy the meadows and lovely riverside walk along this stretch of the Thames. I do appreciate that it would require a significant police presence to tackle this, but can you please commit to trying to address this problem, or are you accepting that some places in the Thames Valley are going to become police no-go areas and anything goes there, despite the impact on residents and businesses? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this is a good question. When I talk about what matters to the public most of all, it is, I think, probably antisocial behaviour. And car meets, it has been raised with me. It's another quite a difficult area. If we knew exactly where the car meets were taking place and how many vehicles there are, we could put appropriate resources. And sometimes when there are closed Facebook groups, and we do our best to get involved in those, and when we know about it, we can do something about it. That being the case, probably about 95% of people attending car meets are decent, law-abiding people who are interested in seeing other people's cars. But there is a hardcore which cause real concern for residents. There is some good practice nationally around this, and I would encourage you, if you have a problem, work closely with Andy. Some local authority areas find usually wasteland where the cars can come. They have an ANPR camera, and people have to register before they attend and pay a small fee. And then it's away from problems, difficulties, don't cause antisocial behaviour. Some local authorities don't want to do that. If it's a real problem, I think it's something we could work to. But we're doing trying some work in Milton Keynes at the moment. And Milton Keynes probably has the biggest problem for car meets. Milton Keynes has been designed with their roundabouts for these car meets. And one of the things, the struggle we're having is we haven't got sufficient resources on duty to deal with the hardcore offenders. And some of these individuals, very small number, they're driving dangerously, they're threatening my officers, we've had damage to police cars. So what we've been doing in Milton Keynes is having cameras fitted, recording all the registration numbers, and then the next day after the event, getting the CCTV, going around and either arresting them or seizing their vehicles. That seems to be working well because we monitor. We haven't got the resources to deal with it at the time, but we go around afterwards and target probably at 5% of individuals after the event, particularly when they've been driving dangerously, they film it, they put it on social media, and that effectively is the evidence that we can then use to prosecute. So, touch wood, it's early days, but that seems to be going well, and some of the feedback we're getting, shall we say, from the antisocial drivers around TVP being a no-go area for their activity. So, but a lot more to do in this space because I know residents are very, very concerned about this.
I'll just add quickly one thing, slightly just on the other side in Bracknell. Somebody videoed somebody doing donuts around a roundabout in Bracknell. They sent it in to us. I put it to Roads Policing team. They knew who the car was, who the person was, and went and took the car off him. So if residents do get any of that, I'm not saying put yourself at risk of videoing stuff, but if you do capture anything, please send it to us, because we can act on it. So just to plea again, that information and intelligence coming from the community does help us tackle these sorts of things. Thank you.
Charles Margetts, please.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to echo Stephen's words to thank you for your work. I know the society values an effective police force focused on their priorities. My question was to Matt, basically. In late 2023, you were kind enough to attend an evening meeting with approximately 30 shopkeepers and local business people in Wokingham. They described a continual problem in the town centre with a small number of people, many known to the traders by name. Incidents were reported of drug taking, continual petty theft, abuse of staff, low-level vandalism. It also came to light the disc system had fallen into disuse there. Now, some reference has been given in the presentation already to more general kind of information across the area, but I was wondering if you can give an update on what steps have been put in place in Wokingham to protect the shopkeepers from this level of crime, what results are forthcoming in Wokingham, and what messages are planned for the future to drive this crime out of the town centre.
Thank you. You've already heard some of those sort of, I wouldn't say necessarily more general, quite specific updates to local issues around the increase in charge, that real focus on prolific offenders, which is those individuals who has used reference, and I know well enough talking to retailers here in Wokingham and elsewhere, the frequent flyers, the well-known faces that cause real concern and frustration. Actually, the police locally identifying top 20 offenders, getting them locked up, and that is starting to have a real impact. In terms of DISC, because I think it's really important, and I think I previously funded the Wokingham DISC system through the Community Fund for a couple of years. That funding is coming to an end at the end of this month, and hopefully members will be aware we're rolling out DISC free to all businesses across Thames Valley. So there are currently between 50 and 100 members on the existing DISC system within Wokingham itself. One of our PCSOs, Victoria Williams, is managing that and keen to continue doing so. There's a meeting actually taking place tomorrow between the local team, the central team who are now managing the new DISC, and the technology supplier, to look at how they move people from one instance of it to the other. And there are plans for a Safer Business Action Day coming up in the next few weeks, to make sure that we're out there promoting the system again. People who perhaps have been on it and felt, well, this hasn't worked in the past, what's the point? Reminding people that this is now being operated by the police with much greater levels of interaction. Woodley, we've been out selling the system. It's not to say selling, it's a free system, but encouraging people to sign up to it in Woodley. There are currently around 65 members in Woodley, and locally there the team are working with Brian Fenley, the town centre manager, to continue to encourage people to roll out. The neighbourhood teams have been briefed on it, so they're increasing both their use of it, but also their encouragement of retailers to use DISC for reporting intelligence sharing. I'm told that Twyford is in the pipeline, so once the Wokingham town system is on board, then it can be fully integrated into that wider work across the borough.
Thank you, Matthew, Jason and Andy. If it's okay with you, we will forward the additional questions that we have, and that is the end of this session. You are, please, free to leave at your discretion. Next item now set is item 66. Now, sadly, agenda item 66 can no longer be heard given the sad passing of Councillor Paul Fishwick. We therefore move to item 67. 67 is the Woking Borough Health and Wellbeing Board Annual Report. I understand Councillor David Hare is proposing this report. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Prue. David, would you like to speak to the report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Woking Borough Health and Wellbeing Board Annual Report for 23-24 is a positive report. We've started many things and have a forward-looking remit. There are 6 priorities that turn strategy into action and partnership groups. Please do read the paper if you haven't already. And any questions for me or Ingrid, who is the author, or Jonas, who's taking over her role, and we'll be pleased to talk with you. Because, as I said, the author of this report is Ingrid Slade, and she moves on to being a professor at the end of the month. I just want to thank her for all she has done, the initiatives she has got running, which you can see in this report, and the fact that she has put public health up the council agenda. If you think about it, public health is important in almost every action of the council. Ingrid has helped people see that fact, and started to work with it, making the best choices for the people of Woking. Thank you, Ingrid, for all you have done. I know I, and I'm sure many others, will miss your wise wisdom and your understanding. So this report is her final report, and it's something that's very important, I believe, as we move forward in what we do.
Thank you, David. Does any member wish to speak against the report? Seconder, do you wish to speak or? No. Okay. We now move straight to the vote on this item. All those in favour of the report and recommendations as set out in the report, please raise your hand. Thank you very much. Those against? Abstentions? Thank you. The recommendations are carried. Thank you. Now we move on to the timetable of meetings. I understand Councillor Stephen Conway is proposing this report. Is that correct, Stephen?
It is, Mr. Mayor.
Is there a seconder? Thank you, Rob. Please, Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm hoping this item will be as uncontroversial as the last one. All group leaders were consulted on the draft, and I understand any concerns that were raised have been worked through. So I propose that without further ado, we agree the timetable before councillors.
Does any member wish to speak against the report? If there's nobody speaking against, then we go straight to the vote. All of those in favour, please. Thank you very much. Abstentions? Against? The report is... the recommendations are carried. Thank you. Now we move on to councillor question time. I would like to propose that Council Procedural 42221, timing and order of business, be suspended to allow all councillor questions to be heard. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Stephen. Members in favour, please show your hands. Thank you. Those against? Abstentions? That's carried. Thank you. I would like to remind exec members that responses to questions must be no longer than 2 minutes, and these will be timed. We now have councillor questions. The first one is from Moses. Would you like to? Yes, I know he's ill, but I didn't know if you wanted to ask the question on his behalf.
I can try, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, he's online. Sorry, apologies, Moses. Please go ahead.
Sorry if my voice is a bit croaky. Okay. My question is for the Executive Member for Housing, Partnerships and the Local Plan. At the meeting of the Community and Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee of 7th October 2024, the Planning Services Department provided a summary of key activity areas and highlighted challenges looking forward. The report highlighted that the reductions in strategic development and development management team staffing have added workload pressures to existing staff. And the development management team is now increasingly reliant on the agreement of extensions of time with applicants to maintain performance standards. In addition, it was stated there is presently no budget set aside for the next local plan to commence, and hence funding will need to be planned for and allocated for 2026-27 onwards, once the new national planning policy framework is published. What is the current assessment of the level of additional staff resources required to process the new volume of planning applications, which will arise from the local plan update, if approved? And how is this reflected in the medium-term financial plan for 2025-2028 to ensure that the current extension of time does not get worse?
Thank you for your question, Moses, and I'm sorry you're not able to be with us, and it's very good of you to join us online when you're not feeling well. You are correct that the paper presented to overview and scrutiny in October highlighted the need for additional resources to be brought into the planning team in future. The team is still working to conclude what may be waiting in part, of course, for government announcements regarding any future changes in the plan-making process and fee setting. We're expecting to get clarity on that by the new year. At this stage, the Assistant Director suggests it's likely we will need additional resource in the strategic development team and additional highways expertise to deliver the new strategic developments located in the local plan update at Hall Farm and South Wokingham. Our intention is to seek the agreement of planning performance agreements, or PPAs, with the developers of those schemes to help cover costs. PPAs are, however, voluntary agreements, and if the developers choose not to sign up, we will need to make a future bid for funding in the medium-term financial plan. In relation to the wider development management service, we are awaiting a decision from government on the potential for local planning fee setting before determining whether we need to make a bid for future funding in the medium-term financial plan. You'll be aware, I think, that the government has made some clear indications that it's intending to allow councils to increase planning fees, but we don't as yet know what the details are. In relation to the next local plan, the need for future resourcing will be determined once we've seen the government's final changes to the National Planning Policy Framework and any consequential changes to the local plan making process for the future. If local fee setting comes in, there is a possibility that planning income may be able to cover some or all
Stephen, can you wrap
costs.
up, please?
Yes, I'll just close with a final comment. The next local plan is likely to be slightly cheaper to produce, but will expend resources of more than £1.5 million over a 3 to 4 year period once this plan is finished and adopted.
Thank you, Stephen. Moses, do you have a supplementary?
I do, Mr. Mayor. Okay.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Which digital tools, such as machine learning, does planning services currently deploy or plan to deploy in their decision-making process to enhance efficiency and cost effectiveness?
Thank you for that supplementary, Moses. You're right to highlight the advantages of using technology that will help with processes that currently are done manually. We are looking into all the ways in which that might be possible. So I think I can't specify the types of technological innovation we'll be using, but certainly we are exploring the role of AI and other such things.
Councillor Rebecca Margetts, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is to David Hare, Lead Member for Adult Services, Health and Wellbeing. What will the implications of the recent Labour budget and the increases in national insurance contributions made by employers what will the implications be for the adult care service at Woking Borough Council?
Thank you for your question, Rebecca. We are, along with all the borough's care providers, gravely concerned at the impact of this, the impact that this potentially brings. Unfunded wage cost pressures announced in the budget. Many of these providers say that if these charges are implemented in April 2025, they will simply be unable to continue to exist. We already struggle to find good quality care. I believe it would be about £3.5 million per annum for the impact of both the national minimum wage and employers' national insurance. We are not at this stage able to say how much of this will be covered in our settlement in December, but are already concerned about this. And that, I must admit, is an approximation, because we've got to find out what happens in reality when it happens. We're already also concerned about the additional funds identified from the ASC from the national perspective will cover only 30% of these costs, which is obviously only one element of an overall vastly underfunded service. This will mean the settlement results in a net decrease of our funding if it all goes to cover the increased employment and national insurance and national minimum wage costs falling on our service providers. We are also concerned that while the NHS employers receive compensation for the increased national insurance contributions, there's no declared commitment to similarly support social care providers. In a shared health and care system, this makes no sense, and we call on the government to extend the compensation to all care providers, and certainly a lot of care providers in this area have written to the government stating this, because it's just stupid that one hand gets it and the other doesn't. This, it is a typical case of the government taking from councils to increase their own income, a state that seems to have continued whether Conservative or Labour are in power.
Rebecca, do you have a supplementary, please?
I do. Thank you, David, and I appreciate your response there. And we are looking at this all the same way, and I share your concerns. Could I ask the lead member that would he agree to sign the nationwide petition against these the budget national insurance increases? Because by signing this on behalf of the council, you will help to force a debate in government. I'm happy to share the link of the petition with you.
I'll need to have a look at who wrote it and so on, and certainly we've lobbied our MPs, we've lobbied the Chancellor of the Exchequer, we've lobbied a lot of people already, but certainly I'm very happy to have a look at that.
Councillor Rohit Alwal, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is to Prue Bray. The recent plan which we discussed in the chamber a couple of months ago, a new primary school in a Sinfield to be built in 2027. When will this school open?
Thank you for your question. The written version of this, and I notice you left out the word, says the recent local plan, which we discussed in this chamber. And there is no reference to a commitment to deliver a new primary school in Shinfield by 2027 in the local plan update. However, consideration is currently being given to the development of a new one-form entry primary school at the Spencer's Wood site. If the decision is taken to proceed with this project, it is envisaged that it will be delivered within 5 years, although it needs to be stressed that this is subject to the materialisation of additional pupil demand in the area. Ultimately, primary school roles are currently in decline due to falling birth rates within Wokingham, reflective of a national trend. It's therefore critical that we balance the ambition to provide sufficient local places with the need to ensure that additional surplus places are not introduced into an education system where schools are already struggling to fill their roles with associated financial pressures. As such, the decision in relation to whether to proceed with the Spencer's Wood project will be informed by actual demand based on evidence from future admissions rounds. It would be incredibly helpful if you could use your supplementary question to clarify where you have seen a reference to the delivery of a new school by 2027, as this is not current Wokingham policy.
Rohit, do you have a supplementary question?
Sorry, sir, I don't have.
You don't. Thank you. Councillor Charles Margetts, please.
Thank you. My question is also to Councillor Bray. There's a shortage of secondary school capacity towards the south of the borough. Bowhunt School is full and children in half of Finch Hampstead face long journeys out of borough to Farnborough or across Wokingham for secondary provision. As more housing is provided at Arborfield in the coming years, this situation will worsen. Historically, in Wokingham Without, children got access to Edgebarrow. How this is now difficult as Edgebarrow is full. The result again is children facing long journeys into Wokingham or out of borough. There's also no post-16 provision in Shinfield currently. What plans are there currently for more provision for secondary school children in the south of the borough?
Thank you for your question, Charles. Local authorities have a statutory duty to provide sufficient school places to meet the needs of their resident population. At the present time, taking into account current capacity and proposed expansions, it is anticipated that there is broadly a sufficient number of secondary places within Wokingham local authority area to account for forecast pupil numbers. The plans for secondary expansion to meet increases in the pupil cohort are set out in the borough's school places strategy 2024-25 to 2029-30 on pages 12 to 16 and include a permanent expansion of Bowhunt School by one form of entry. It is projected that the expansion plans will be sufficient to accommodate demand, except for the two peak years of 2027-28 and 2028-29, when a small deficit of under one form of entry is currently projected. As a usual process, school organisation team regularly reviews the forecasts and will make suitable adjustments as admissions data becomes available within the annual cycle. Should the forecast be borne out, the intention is to deliver a bulge class in each of the two peak years, so as to ensure that school place offers can be made to all applicants, although it is presently too early to formalise plans in this respect. It is worth noting that school place planning requires a fine balance between the provision of sufficient places and the need to ensure that an oversupply is not produced, which necessarily places a financial strain on schools where vacancies arise. Indeed, as the low birth rate currently being experienced within the primary sector makes its way through to the secondary sector, it's expected that a substantial places surplus will arise, which will require adjustments in the other direction, i.e. admission number reductions. The delivery of more places than currently planned for at this stage would not only exacerbate this issue, but would represent a substantial capital outlay to mitigate a fleeting issue. The strategy for the delivery of additional post-16...
Prue, can you start to close, please?
Yep, I've got about 2 sentences. It's not only a quantitative, but also a qualitative matter, and the borough strategy for post-16 sufficiency will be set out in the next iteration of the school places strategy, which is currently targeted for delivery by mid-2025.
Charles, do you have a supplementary?
I note your comments about post-16 strategy, which is coming, and we'll look forward to that. I note also what you said about secondary school capacity across the borough, basically, and the primary school situation at the moment, which inevitably will work through. I can't help but express concern, though, over the situation with these figures. Since I was first elected in Finch Hampstead, I've seen the catchment for Bowhunt School shrink and shrink and shrink, basically, in terms of the geographical size. And I really hope you're right. I think the question I would ask is how often are these schools, secondary school expectations of numbers reviewed, and can details be published, so if basically my fears prove to be correct, there can be some corrective action taken.
It's part of a regular cycle, so every year we have an admissions cycle and then we review the results, and it goes round in an iterative loop. We've just published the first strategy, and I'm sure that not only will the next one be published next year, but we will be taking it to Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny for discussion as well.
Councillor George Evans, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is to the Executive Member for Finance and Governance. At a time when cuts are being made to council-provided services, it's more vital than ever that strong returns on investments are being obtained on this council's significant portfolio. Can the Executive Member please provide an overview of Woking Borough Council's current property portfolio, specifically detailing the portfolio's total value and its revenue contribution to the council's budget?
Thank you, George. Yes, Woking Borough Council, like most local authorities, has significant property portfolio, which can be divided into two parts. One part, known as the operational estate, contributes directly to delivery of services such as libraries, schools, leisure centres, parks, open spaces, social housing, and even roads and road signs. The second part, known as the commercial property portfolio, is the property that generates revenue income which can be used to fund service delivery. It is, of course, vital that we ensure that all council assets are utilised in their optimum capacity, both in delivering services and in revenue generation. As of the last valuation on the 31st of March 2022, the council's property portfolio has a net book value of just under 500 million. The commercial portfolio covers a wide range of sectors, including office, retail and industrial units. This includes council's holdings in Wokingham Town Centre, constructed as part of the Wokingham Town Centre regeneration project over the last decade, and the investment portfolio acquired through a deliberate property investment strategy has been placed since 2017. This combined passing annual rental income figure of this commercial portfolio is around 8.71 million, which landlord costs for management and investment needs to be deducted before it can be used by the council. So that's the number. For further details on this, I would point you to suggest that you look at the executive paper from March 2024 titled The Strategic Asset Review, which includes more details on the values and the list of the individual properties held by this council. We'll be bringing forward next year's version of the council's asset management plan in the spring of next year, which will set the strategy in the action plan for the management of the council's property portfolio for the next 5 years.
George, do you have a supplementary, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your response. Could you clarify whether there are any plans at the moment to dispose of any assets that are underperforming within the portfolio, and how going forward the council is going to ensure that the investment decisions are aligned with delivering maximum long-term value for our taxpayers?
All of our portfolio is under review all the time. We do have assets that we are looking at, and they, of course, will go through scrutiny before anything happens to them. So there would be a public review of those assets, but at the moment I can't clarify anything that's being disposed of, but there's obviously, it's under review all the time.
Councillor Joseph Barley, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question's for the Executive Member for Resident Services, Inclusion and Fighting Poverty. Now, many of Wokingham's smaller charities are set to be hit with, in a lot of cases, well over £10,000 worth of additional national insurance bills as a result of the Labour government's increase in NI in the recent budget. Now, for many, it will be a cost they simply cannot afford. What steps are the council taking to support our smaller local charities from having to reduce or potentially cease the positive work that they do across the borough?
Thank you for your question, Joseph. Charities are under financial pressure. Many are already in a difficult position because of cutbacks under the previous government and the sheer number of people in need. You quote a figure of well over £10,000 for smaller local charities. The impact on local charities from the changes in national insurance will differ greatly depending on the number of employees, the level of pay and the hours worked. We expect smaller charities with mainly volunteer staff and low levels of employees to be affected much less severely. However, the council works very closely with many local charities and is already working to understand the impacts on them. The council and voluntary and community sector work together as much as possible, pooling resources to support people. Because of the huge financial pressures on local government, we can't always offer direct financial support, but we can often offer support in other ways to ensure that they are able to continue their positive work across the borough. This support includes innovative approaches such as the proposed community lottery to raise money for local charities and community organisations across Wokingham Borough, actively lobbying the government for adequate resources and policies to support our communities, of which charities are a vital part, advocating for the necessary funding and support to tackle issues such as poverty and the cost of living crisis, and for national policies to tackle the root causes of problems, commissioning services from charities across adults and children's services, providing seed funding to help our voluntary and community sector partners, where possible, providing or working with other partners to provide suitable spaces where charities can operate, saving on costly rents, and regular meetings to discuss a wide range of issues impacting the sector. Where beneficial, we work in collaboration with the voluntary and community sector to address these.
Joseph, do you have a supplementary?
I do, thank you. I appreciate the work that the council is currently doing for our local charities, especially given that, one that I've been told is facing a £25,000 rise in their national insurance bills and their costs as a result. However, there was something that I thought of earlier today walking to the offices of the council, and that was how horrific the weather has been today, specifically the temperature. And it had me thinking, when I was thinking about my question, that it's highly likely that charities that support the elderly across the borough are going to have to reduce their services, and that difficult decisions are going to have to be made as we move into these coldest months of the year. I would like to ask, what progress have the council made in supporting our elderly residents whilst the Labour government have restricted their availability of the winter fuel allowance?
So thank you very much for your supplementary, Joseph. This is obviously a key concern for Woking Borough Council at the moment, and many of our partner organisations, including Age UK Berkshire. I gave quite a comprehensive update on what we're doing in the last full council meeting. So we are working very closely with our voluntary and community sector partners. The officers are already they're undertaking very proactive action to contact as many elderly people as possible who we believe may be eligible for pension tax credit. If you're eligible for pension tax credit and you succeed in getting that before the 21st of December this year, you will get the winter fuel allowance for this year. And I would encourage all of the councillors in this chamber to make themselves aware of what we can do to reach out to our elderly residents to make them aware of the pension tax credit. Thank you very much.
Councillor Shahid Yunus, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm assuming that, Stephen, you'll be responding to this question. In October 2023, with the funding from the previous government, park and ride sites were revived, leading to a new bus route for the Winnish Triangle site and public usage of the Coppet Beach car park. Can you please provide the most recent usage figures for each park and ride site in Woking Borough Council?
Thank you for your question, Shahid, and yes, sadly, it is to me, I'm afraid. I can confirm that the number of vehicles parked in each of the park and ride car parks during October 2024 is as follows: Winnish Triangle, 2,496 vehicles; Thames Valley Park, 991 vehicles; Coppet Beach, 55 vehicles. It should be noted that the number of vehicles parked does not directly translate into the number of bus journeys undertaken. There are two reasons for this. Firstly, there can be more than one occupant per vehicle, and secondly, some passengers use park and ride services to travel into Woking Borough. For example, during October this year, we know that there were 9,963 passenger trips on Winnish Triangle Park and Ride services. In relation to Coppet Beach, which you will have noticed has the fewest vehicles using it, you'll be aware that the current administration inherited a commitment from your administration, and we've always had our doubts about Coppet Beach, but we have sought to make it work.
Shahid, do you have a supplementary, please?
Yes, please. Thank you, Stephen, for the update. Yes, Coppet Beach, very low figures there. Considering the importance of promoting sustainable travel, what specific strategies and upcoming initiatives are aimed at increasing the usage of these park and ride facilities so we can encourage people to use most public transport?
Well, I'm sure you'll be aware of the initiative that was taken in relation to Winner's Triangle recently, which has clearly had some impact, and we will be trialling all sorts of things that we think might stimulate greater use of these facilities, because it is, as you quite rightly say, Shahid, important as part of our action on climate emergency to try and promote wherever we can the use of buses where possible. Obviously, we need to promote buses separately from park and rides as well, because bus travel reduces congestion on the roads and is a very big plus in many ways for many residents. We need also to promote active travel, something very close, as you know, to Paul's heart. Active travel not only has enormous public health benefits for the individuals concerned and for wider society, but it also clearly, again, reduces the number of car vehicles on the road and therefore makes it easier for anyone who has to use the road or wishes to use the road to use it more expeditiously.
Councillor Sienna Turtle, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is for the Leader of the Council. In answer to a question from my resident David Slight at the October meeting, the reply was that Gypsy Lane footbridge is to be enhanced by the developer. What are those enhancements? Are there any drawings and costings available? And have the land acquisition issues been resolved to confirm that the proposed enhancements are practicable?
Thank you, Shona. The answer provided under question CP20 to David Slight at the last council meeting, I don't think it actually stated that Gypsy Lane footbridge was to be enhanced. It stated that the Gypsy Lane footbridge route is to be enhanced by the developer. It's a slight but rather important difference there. This would result in the footpaths leading to the bridge being enhanced. Therefore, we have no drawings or costings, I'm afraid, at this stage to provide you. Conditions of the planning permissions will require these details to be submitted. That's when we would have those detailed drawings we can share with you. The Gypsy Lane footbridge, as you I think may be aware, is owned and operated by Network Rail, and during the planning application process they did not make any comments or seek, I'm afraid, any enhancements to this bridge.
Sienna, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, I do. Thank you for clarifying, Stephen. This means that the local plan update is proposing a settlement which will bring a total of 7,000 people south of the railway on a stretch of over a mile. The only step-free place to get across the railway is at Star Lane level crossing on East Hampstead Road, where the barriers are down for lengthy periods and the draft local transport plan calls for more frequent trains. Last month we were told that the constraints precluded a bridge or a tunnel. Assuming these constraints are valid, it was clear that an uninterrupted crossing without steps was not possible. So why was the proposal to increase the housing by some 60% not stopped at that point there and then?
Obviously, thank you very much for that supplementary, and I do understand your concern. And I think there's a lot of work going on modelling to see what transport and cycling and walking implications are of the new developments that are proposed in the new local plan. You'll be aware of the transport modelling that's gone on for the whole local plan. That is an integral part of the process. It's a very costly and very time-consuming piece of work. But that has established the feasibility of these sites, which is why they're in the plan. They've been assessed as feasible.
Councillor Yusra Salman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, please accept my sincere condolence for Paul. My question to the executive member, Housing, Partnership and the Local Plan. Shared footways and cycleways across the Wokingham Borough, including in Woodley, are the only option in many parts of the borough for cycleways. However, some elderly and vulnerable residents can feel unsafe walking alongside cyclists. What can the council do to ensure their safety and mitigate risk?
Thank you for your question, Yusra, and you raising an important point. Where a path is designated as shared use, cyclists are legally able to cycle there. However, they should be cycling considerately and taking care around other users of the route. You may be aware that the Highway Code has recently been updated and includes a road hierarchy where cyclists must give way to pedestrians. There is now guidance from the Department for Transport that encourages segregation of pedestrian, cyclists and motor traffic in many situations. This would mean dedicated cycle lanes fully segregated from cars to enable a safer path for cyclists as well as keeping them away from pedestrians, but only in locations where, of course, this is physically possible. There are constraints. It's not always possible to deliver that ideal solution. And this would only apply, of course, to new or newly upgraded roads. You couldn't impose it retrospectively. All routes, new and existing, have been designed following government standards at the time and are all subject to road safety audits, ensuring the facility is safe for use. We've done all we can to deliver a safe facility. However, we're not able to control the behaviour of users. We do provide cycle training for adults and children in the borough and promote courteous use of shared use facilities through our My Journey team. This includes using the facilities at Woodford Park in Woodley to run some of the training. Ultimately, it is the responsibility of the users to be considerate of each other as they use the public highway.
Yusra, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, thank you for your answer. And thank you for letting me know about the upgraded sign, highway code, highway sign, yeah. So, residents in my ward have raised serious concerns about the newly developed shared footpath and cycleway in Beechwood Avenue. While the footpath is quite wide, the lack of clear markings and signage is causing confusion and increasing the risk of potential accidents. Will the highway team consider implementing clear markings and appropriate signage to ensure the safe and effective use of this shared space for both pedestrian and cyclist?
Thank you for your supplementary question, Yusra. If you could pass on the details of that to me, I will, of course, talk to the highways team and see whether anything can be done to answer your point.
We now move on to minutes of committee meetings and ward matters. We have 20 minutes scheduled for this with no supplementaries. Please, can you put your hand high so that Democratic Services can get a record? Who wants to speak here? Keep them up until we say so, please. Thank you. Put them down, please. Right, we'll start with Bassett Alvey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have been approached by multiple residents and community representatives from multiple wards regarding the lack of burial spaces for Muslims in Wokingham Borough Council. Currently, there is only one space remaining at May Lane and Shinfield Cemetery. My question to the Leader of Council is, can we ensure the provisioning of dedicated burial spaces for Muslims in our cemetery?
Thank you for that question, Bassett. I actually received an email on this very subject today, making a similar request. I appreciate the importance of this matter to the Muslim community. We're aware that limited space remains and are working as speedily as possible to increase the options, either at the existing cemetery that the council controls or on a new site. And we're also working with our partners on this important matter. So while I can't say how quickly we will be able to do this, we are doing it as speedily as we can, because we know there is a critical issue here in terms of the remaining capacity almost having been used up. So we will do everything we can to try and advance this as rapidly as possible. So it is possible for Muslim burials to take place within the borough, because I am very well aware that the alternative is Cemetery Junction and the cemetery there, but that's out of borough, and it would cost Wokingham residents more money. So it is important that we try and increase in borough provision, and we are working to that end.
Shahid Yunus, please.
Thank you, Matt. In my ward, I'm not sure who will, probably Stephen will probably come to yourself, right? There's an issue which has been, going on for some time. In my ward, there are a number of properties which are owned by Reading Borough Council, and they have car parks, parking facility as well to go with it as well. So those properties are managed by Reading Borough Council, but actually their residents pay the council tax to us and all the services we provide. Those garages which they have got, they want to use them for their own purpose. But what's happening is they are being utilized by people across Reading, all over Berkshire basically, and they are not able to use them. So the problem is, right, I'm not sure how we do handle this. They are saying that Reading Borough Council is not listening to them because they look, it's not really their interest as such. When they contact Wokingham, they say, look, we can't do anything because it's Reading, but they are caught in the middle, but they have got real issues which needs to be addressed. So I'm just thinking that would it be possible if the officers perhaps can actually have a look at this case and at least maybe have, see what can be done, and maybe have a discussion with our colleagues in Reading to come to some sort of amicable resolution. End of the day, they are our residents. They have serious concerns. They're not being listened to. I think we need to help them, and we need to be on the side of the residents.
Thank you for raising that important issue, Shahid. You're absolutely right. These residents are caught in an unfortunate limbo between Reading Borough Council and Wokingham Borough Council. And it is, on the face of it, a somewhat anomalous situation that Reading Borough Council should own housing stock in Wokingham, and yet the residents pay the council tax to Wokingham. So it's a situation that needs a bit of unpacking, and I'm very happy to work with our housing officers, our excellent housing officers, who will be keen to try and help. We fortunately have a good working relationship with Reading Borough Council, and I'm sure we will be able to use all the avenues we have available to raise this issue with them and try and address it. Thank you.
Thank you. My question's for the Executive Member for Housing. The closure of the Shinfield community flat in Frensham Green caused quite a lot of upset with residents just over 6 months ago, I believe. There's increasing frustration that it seems that it's still vacant. Do you know when it will be used for housing, as I believe the purpose was?
Thank you, Andrew. I can't give you that information off the top of my head, I'm afraid, but I will try and get you that detail as soon as possible. But you're absolutely right. The decision was taken that the facility was better used for housing. You will be aware that we do have a real problem with shortage of affordable housing. Many of our residents are desperate for affordable housing. We have a waiting list that is far too long. We do have to seize every opportunity we have to try and make sure that we make best use of the facilities available to us. I fully understand there are concerns about what's seen as the loss of a community facility. You and I think, corresponded on this some while ago when this was first mooted, and you expressed your concerns then. I'll try and get you the details of when we hope that this building will be put into full use as accommodation.
George Evans, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question's to the Executive Member for Environment. Within the new development of Fishwick Park, the green spaces are handed over to the Council in phases, at which point the Council becomes responsible for their maintenance. Many residents have expressed disappointment to me about the quality of these spaces and do not feel they've been completed to the standard that was approved in the Planning Permission. What measures are in place to address these concerns, ensure the spaces are handed over in line with the approved plans and guarantee they remain accessible and beneficial for the local community?
Do you want me to I think this is possibly more of a local plan or a planning issue than an environment issue, but I understand it could easily be conceived as environmental. We've talked about these problems about the management of open spaces on new developments before in this council chamber quite often, and it is a real problem. You've identified a really serious issue that we are trying to find ways of addressing. As you know, developers are not obliged to hand over to us any of these open spaces for our maintenance and our care. They can choose to set up a management company which will carry out that function. Our concern is often that those management companies don't carry out that function very well. You are absolutely right that there are occasions when the handover, the standard required, has not been met. And we will do all we can, obviously, to try and ensure it is. But if you can give me the specific instances of the concerns you have, I'll very happily take those up and see whether we can do anything.
Rob Comer, please.
Thank you. Residents have reported to me their increasing perception of homeless people being present in Wokingham Town Centre, a significant portion of which is in my ward. It seems fairly clear that we do currently have some rough sleeping in the town centre, and although numerically this doesn't seem to be a huge problem, it clearly causes concern to some residents. Could the Executive Member for Housing, Partnerships and the Local Plan please let me know what steps have been and are being taken to address this issue?
Thank you for that, Rob, and I know this is a concern that many people have expressed. I want to assure you that the Council is fully committed to addressing homelessness and rough sleeping. On homelessness, it is worth saying that we've made recently some rather good progress. At the end of October, we just had 6 families in emergency accommodation. Emergency accommodation is essentially where we're paying for overnight accommodation, bed and breakfast and overnight. It was down to 6. That's a big drop from Q2 when it had been 15 families. So that's a tribute really to the work that our homelessness team is putting in. But on the specific issue of rough sleeping, we've got a range of support services working to actually help rough sleepers. We've got a dedicated rough sleepers outreach and support team. we've been developing accommodation options for rough sleepers and working, of course, closely with our voluntary and charitable sector partners. Joseph mentioned cold weather earlier on. It's been particularly cold today, and you can imagine what that must be like for people sleeping on the streets. We do have a system in place where when we know there's going to be really cold overnight temperatures, we have a system that provides immediate accommodation for those who are on the streets. Immediate accommodation, that's prioritised over everything. We obviously need to ensure that we save people's lives. Of course, it has to be said that some rough sleepers are very reluctant to accept help. They actually decline our support. In some cases, there's a suspicion, there's a hostility to anybody perceived to be in a position of authority. In those cases, it's really very difficult for us to be able to offer the support we want. But we do have dedicated teams that are working very hard.
Stephen, can you wrap up, please?
I can indeed. And if you want to know more, I would urge you to contact David Higgins, who's in charge of our homelessness and rough sleeping teams.
Pauline Jorgensen, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm delighted that the resident who contacted me about Muslim burials as well obviously took my advice, which was to email Stephen, and I'm glad we've got some answer. I'm just wondering, not necessarily now, Stephen, but could you give us a plan and some dates as to when something's going to have to be done? Because as far as I understand, there is only one Muslim burial plot available in Early, and obviously Muslims can't be cremated. They need to be buried very quickly, and the costs in Reading are very high because of the out of area arrangements that are in place. So if you could separately, I don't expect you to know it off the top of your head, if you could give us a timetable, that would be brilliant.
Thank you, Pauline. You're absolutely right that I don't know off the top of my head, and it would be very foolish of me to guess. But I will try and get that to you as soon as possible. I'm very aware of the importance of this issue for the Muslim community, and it is extremely important to us that we try and address it.
Caroline Smith, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is to Councillor Stephen Conway in regards to this. A few of my hillside residents use the various footpaths to access the Shinfield Road to get to Crossfield School. In the council meeting the 23rd of March 2023, Councillor Barry Path presented a petition signed by 290 people requesting a pedestrian crossing outside the main entrance to the Crossfields on the Shinfield Road. Later, in October 2023, in response to a member's question, it was stated there were locations with higher priority. It was also stated, in light of an accident between a pedestrian and a cyclist overtaking a bus, if it was reassessed, that accident would become part of the evidence base. Please may I have an update on how this request for a crossing is progressing? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Caroline. Traffic and Road Safety Team has actually surveyed the area you're talking about and supports the installation of a new crossing. A detailed feasibility report will, I understand, be shared with local members very shortly, and we expect the crossing will then be subject to design work. So it is moving forward, and I'm hoping it'll be moving forward very soon.
Vishal Srinivasan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is to Councillor Bray, and my concern is that residents have been continuously contacting me about how Oakbank School does not meet to their standards. And in a recent planning committee meeting, it was mentioned that the school is undersubscribed. However, the reason for this undersubscription is because parents aren't happy with the quality of education they receive there. My feeling is that the students deserve better than this. So my question to you is, what is the WBC doing to fix this? And when can residents expect to see improvements?
Thank you. This is a really serious issue. As I think I've said before in this chamber and in Children's Services I've been scrutiny, this is a school which is part of a multi-academy trust, so the council has no direct levers that it can pull to make change. However, we have been doing a considerable amount of work trying to support the school, and I know that our Director of Children's Services has had meetings with the Regional Director for the Department of Education. We have been in contact with the trust, with the school, and I also know, which I think is public knowledge, that Ofsted have visited partly as a result of that contact. And obviously we have to wait for the outcome of that Ofsted report. But we do take it very seriously, and I think all of us share your concerns that students deserve a decent education, and we need to do whatever we can to support the school, the parents and the children, and the staff, who I think are also experiencing difficulties.
Stephen Newton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is for the Exec Member for Environment and Climate Emergency. Firstly, may I ask you to thank officers for their response to my ward colleague Andy's recent request for working in Borough Council to add Town Lane to the Borough's clearance and maintenance programme. Work has already been carried out to help keep this vital and popular community link safe and accessible for residents. The Friends of Town Lane, who do a lot to help maintain Town Lane, really appreciate the new support working in Borough Council, alongside that of Woody Town Council, who already look after a short stretch of the lane. Secondly, may I ask you to further thank officers for their support of the community clean-up that recently took place on the field and surrounding area along Woodlands Avenue. The community group collected 21 bags of waste, plus some stuff that would not fit in the bags. It was a pleasure to be part of the team and support local resident Mary, who organised this event. My thanks to everyone who turned out to help, including my fellow early town councillor Sheena. And can you please pass on our thanks to the officers for arranging for the waste to be collected so quickly and disposed of safely and appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I'll more than certainly pass on your kind comments, and I know that the officers involved very much enjoyed working with the Friends. Apologies, leave it there. Thank you.
Now we move on to statements by the leader and executive members. Who wants to talk, please? Just hold your hands up for a second, sorry. Okay, Stephen, would you like to kick off, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We heard earlier this evening tributes, actually many moving tributes to Paul. And of course his untimely passing requires someone to step up to take his place on the executive. I certainly don't want to be in the position where I'm answering all the questions that would have come to Paul. I'm pleased to report that my colleague and friend Martin Older has agreed to do so. Martin has a very good analytical brain and an ability to work well with others. He's already met many of the officer team, and he's much more than a safe pair of hands. He shares Paul's passion for active travel, and he knows a good deal about transport, and I'm looking forward to working with him. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Prue, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make a short statement about two recent events held by Children's Services. The first was the first Wokingham Education Conference, which took place on the 11th of November, which had good representation from school leaders and focused on the subject of inclusion. And the second was an event for young people with a Youth Future Focus theme, which was held on the 15th of November following an extensive survey to which we got more than 2,000 responses. and children from a wide range of secondary schools enthusiastically workshopped their ideas for how to make the borough better for young people. Both events were excellent and well received, and I expect similar events to take place on a regular basis. Although it's not an executive statement technically, I did want to update the council that I have received a message from Leslie during the course of the meeting to say that she and the whole family watched the council meeting, were very proud of Paul and found it extremely emotional, but they were very proud of him and found the tributes extremely comforting. So thank you, everybody.
Rachel, please.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Rather unusually, I want to make a statement at this point in the meeting about the Health and Wellbeing Board annual report, which my colleague David Hare introduced to us earlier. We moved very quickly to the vote, but I didn't want to lose the opportunity to highlight to all members of the council some of the data which stood out to me in my role as executive member for fighting poverty and also for inclusion. If you're a woman living in one of the more deprived areas of the borough, you will on average live 5 years less than other residents. If you're a man, it's 6 years. That statistic highlights the real impact on poverty on those living here in Wokingham. Around 6% of Wokingham children are living in relatively low-income households, or in other words, in poverty. That's a shockingly high number. Growing up in a household where there isn't enough money to provide basic necessities, however hard your parents try to make things work, can have a lifelong effect on a child. Turning to equality and inclusion, on page 58 of the pack, there are some statistics which show stark disparities between the start in life that different groups of children enjoy. For example, children in some ethnic groups are on average having a much harder start in life than others. These figures show the importance of the work of the Health and Wellbeing Board and officers across the council who are working to do what they can to tackle these inequalities. It also highlights the importance of our commitment to working as a Marmot Borough to improve the health and reduce health inequalities among our residents. When he was presenting the report, David encouraged us all to read this report, and I'd really like to echo that. There's some very important information here for all of us on the lives of our residents. Thank you very much.
Imogen, please.
Thank you. Recently, the Electoral Commission released its report on the July 2024 Parliamentary General Election, as well as others that occurred in May. And I thought I would summarise some of the key points here and relate them to Wokingham. The general election was called less than 3 weeks after the local elections, and the elections team across the country had only 25 working days to prepare and deliver the election. This involved finding venues, staff, processing candidates' applications, as well as printing and preparing ballot papers. There were over 2.8 million applications to register to vote between the 22nd of May and the 27th of June. I do not think we should underestimate the scale of the task that was undertaken in that process. The report revealed that most people across the country were confident that the elections were well run, but among those that were most unhappy were rather worryingly a large number of people with disabilities and long-term health conditions. The report agrees that this was a problem that needed much more attention. Turnout across the UK in general election was only 60%, which was down from 67.6 in 2019. By comparison, the Wokingham constituency, our turnout was over 72%, but only 63.2 in the Early Woodley constituency. Either way, our vote turned out for the general election remains to be higher than average levels and across the country. Nationwide, there was a surge of more than 1.3 million postal voter applications, which were made after the general election was announced. This was the first general election where people could apply online for the postal vote, and it seems that many postal voters did not understand the timings around the postal votes and when they were expecting them to arrive. For instance, before they went away on holiday, rather than the reality for many, 4 days before polling day. The deadline for applying for a postal vote was the 19th of June, and for the 4th of July election. Nearly 470,000 applications were made from the 14th of June onwards. Many of the suppliers reported problems in getting postal votes printed and dispatched in time with such short deadlines. Sadly, many overseas voters did not get their ballots in time and were not able to return them. This was often due to the delays in their local postal services. Only 52% of overseas voters returned their ballots, and many of them felt the system was not working for them. I might add that while not part of this report, I did witness my wife casting her overseas military vote for the recent US elections. It was sent as an electronic ballot and no paper or printing was involved. This is how the United States astronauts voted from the space station. Honestly, it may be something the UK should think about for voters in these far-flung places where the postal services are not going to be available to meet those deadlines. Here in the UK, a total of 4,515 candidates stood in the general election and came from over 100 political parties. There were new constituency boundaries across 584 seats. One of the points of note was that 55% of these candidates reported that they had endured some kind of problem with harassment, intimidation or abuse. Certainly both women and people from ethnic minority backgrounds still received the biggest share. Other problems raised include candidates that were misleading voters about their identities, and the officers had very little powers to reject these candidates who were making false statements. While it seems that overall our elections went well, especially here in Woking Borough, I thought it was important to highlight these issues. Thank you.
David, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to tell you about something that happened a week ago, the Wokin's Women's Network event, which was the second of this year. This was the second of the year to maintain momentum. In future, it will be about World Women's Day in March, and we'll have the event annually. And this was a day about women's health, and it was split into 3 headings, which were listening to women's voice, and especially young women's voice, because so often that isn't heard in concern with health, and spotlighting on current local projects, and also a menopause workshop. It was a very positive time, and certainly I appreciated it, and I know Prue was there for much of it and found it very valuable. And my main memory is of the chief nurse of Bob, that's the NHS area in which we're in, saying how we were well ahead of others on women's health, but we had to press on and listen to women. And that's often so important, that if we don't listen to people, we don't know what they need and what they want. It was great having people from health, the voluntary sector, and the council working together to improve their understanding and work with women of all ages and their ethnicities. Thank you.
We now move on to statements from council-owned companies. Are there any statements? Stephen, please.
Just a very brief statement, Mr. Mayor, just to remind everyone that the first shareholders committee will be meeting immediately after next week's executive meeting.
Then we move on to motions. Motion 527. Councillor Charles Margetts, will you be proposing this motion?
I will, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
I believe we have an amendment, though.
Yes, I can see one in front of me. Do you have a seconder? Thank you, Pauline. Where am I on this? Would you, sorry, can you remind me where I am? Yeah. Charles, you've got 3 minutes. Do you wish to speak to the motion?
I do, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Since I was elected in 2016, the number one issue my residents have raised with me continually has been the level of new house building expected in the borough and the effect it has on existing infrastructure and services. Wokingham's population has increased by 15% from 2012 to 22. Based on my experience, residents are not opposed to new housing, but are firmly against new developments occurring without the necessary infrastructure to support it. Recently, the new government announced plans to raise the house building target for Wokingham from the current level of 748 homes per year to 1,308, a 75% increase. If implemented, this will bring about significant changes. When we discussed the local plan here a few months ago, it was presented as a choice between 3 sites, Hall Farm, Ashridge and Twyford. Councillor Alder argued against development of the site at Twyford, giving the principal defence that the green belt, which it would take, is an asset to the whole borough. However, under these proposals, the green belt will be gone, and as an officer confirmed to me recently, the only likely outcome is the development of all 3 sites. Even then, this will not be enough to hit this housing target of 1,308 houses a year. We're here to represent our residents. Do our residents want to see 20-storey flats in Wokingham similar to those built in Maidenhead as a result of a decision to build upwards rather than outwards? Do our residents want to see building heights across the borough raised from 6 to 6 or 8 storeys? Do our residents want to see this level of development imposed on us without any investment in infrastructure? If these proposals proceed, that's exactly what we'll get. We do need more houses in the UK, and we also need more affordable houses. However, if we're serious addressing the housing shortage as a country, we should build in the areas with the highest prices and demand. Wokingham has a proven track record of exceeding housing delivery targets, yet in London, the Mayor has delivered 1/3 of his target of £100,000 a year. His reward for this has been a reduction in his housing target under this proposal by 20,000 houses a year. This makes no sense. When in opposition, Liberal Democrat councillors were very vocal about house building. There were pledges to oppose house building at Hall Farm, to stop development in the south of Wokingham, and other areas. They came from all basic councillors and the man who's now our MP, who protested vigorously against Hall Farm. Today, the Liberal Democrats hold control of the council and the local Westminster seat. I think it's time for them to demonstrate leadership on this issue. The government's policy is misguided. It's detrimental to the UK and it will be very harmful for Wokingham. I would question whether it's even practically deliverable here, and there's no commitment to funding the necessary infrastructure to support it. It will not work. We're here to serve our residents and to represent their interests, not to just acquiesce to central government. We should not be silent on this. The motion I put forward presents a practical plan to challenge the government effectively. If the Liberal Democrats and any other councillors are willing to work with us on this matter, we're happy to support them, we're happy to work with them and try and make sure, basically, that we preserve the good things about Wokingham while still allowing a manageable amount of new housing to be built. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Does any member wish to speak against the report? Stephen?
Well, it's not exactly against, it's to propose an amendment, which is on the table in front of you, on the green sheet of paper. I appreciate that not everyone has had opportunity to look at this for very long, so if any member wishes an adjournment, I would certainly be very happy to support that.
Do you have a seconder? Yeah, what, Pauline or... Sorry, I'm trying to get my ducks in a row here. Pauline, would you like to speak now or reserve your right?
I'd like to reserve my right, and also we're happy to accept the amendment.
Okay. Yeah, so Stephen becomes seconder. Yes, sorry, Steve. Yes, that was Martine is the seconder, sorry. So we've got seconders for both points. The amendment is accepted, so it becomes a substantive motion. So what's the next step? Yeah, so it should be a debate now, right? Because... Okay, so anybody wish to speak against the amended motion? Okay, so we've got Marie and Alex. So, sorry, Marie, would you like to start, please?
Thank you. Mary-Louise would like to start. I'm going to promote the controversial suggestion that actually housing is good, actually, and we should have more of it. And that's not something that we get to hear that much about. In this chamber and in leaflets and communications that are made outside, we often hear about the threat of housing. Housing is presented very often as something which is imposed by an external force, whether it be local government, the central government, sorry, a particular political party. And what has survived the amendment is this continual reference to the character and nature of our borough and the threat that housing represents to it. And I want to speak very clearly that the nature and character of the borough for many, many people is one where housing is a constant, agonising worry. Yeah? We're talking about people who cannot start their careers because they can't find anywhere to live independently, young people who have to stay at home, people in rented accommodation who basically live from short-term lease to short-term lease, families who cannot start having children or extend their families because they cannot buy the space. This is, for many people, the nature and character of the borough. And I would like to underline the commitment that we should all have towards working to address those issues, and that this is the core need, not only in this borough, but in the whole country. We have many problems. We have low growth, we have economic instability, we have rising inequality. Lack of housing is not the cause of all of those, but it makes each of those worse. And so we really want, what we want to talk about, what we would rather be talking about instead of this constant negotiation, complaint about numbers, is how do we work to make the housing that we need benefit the community that we live in and the community that we want to be. Thank you.
Alex, next, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to say I'm quite disappointed that this motion has been tabled, and I'm particularly disappointed that it's being supported by the Lib Dem group. Everyone seemed to enjoy Guess Who last month, so I thought I'd do another one today. And I've upped the stakes. So there is now a box of chocolate fingers up for grabs. So fingers on buzzers, here is the quote. We are committed to tackling these housing failures head-on by increasing building of new homes to 380,000 a year across the UK, including 150,000 social homes per year. Any guesses? No? Yeah? It is Ed Davies, congratulations. Yes, I'll give you your prize at the end. So yes, that's page 71 of the Lib Dem manifesto. And those targets are 27% higher than the government's. So to put that into context, that's an additional 349 houses on top of the 1,308 that we're already set to build. Hold on a second, I've completely lost my place. This motion calls for a review of Wokingham's housing need, but it also wants to produce a lower figure. Now, I'm a policy analyst, and I can tell you that conducting a review is a complete and utter waste of time if you're going to start with the conclusion and work backwards. So I thought I'd conduct my own review to save our council officers some time. There are currently 1,337 people on the Wokingham Borough Housing Register. That's down from 1,510 in 2019. So at this rate, it will take 38 years to satisfy demand for affordable housing. Then there's young people, and I can't speak for Vishal and Joseph, but I definitely can't afford to buy a house anytime soon. And according to 2021 census figures, I'm not the only one, because there I found that in Wokingham, a third of those in their 20s and 1 in 6 people in their early 30s still live with their parents. So we aren't meeting the demand for first-time buyers either. In fact, the only people I can think of who demand less housing are people who already own a home. So this motion fails to understand the purpose of housing policy. And it's so disappointing that the amendment speaks of being reasonable and realistic, but is completely tone-deaf to the problems that people in this borough are actually facing. According to YouGov, 62% of voters want more house building, compared to 29% who don't. And Labour's pledge to build 1.5 million homes was our second most popular policy. So if the council wants to be seen acting on housing issues, perhaps it should get in contact with Yuan Yang, who yesterday at PMQs asked Angela Rayner directly what the government is doing about management companies. And again, this motion speaks about changing the character and nature of the borough. I'm a member of Wokingham Baptist Church, and our congregation has increased by about 1/3 thanks to new people joining our borough. We're now thriving, particularly
Alex,
thanks
your time's up, really.
Okay, can I just say the last bit?
Just finish off, just briefly.
These new houses are going to be built and they're going to be filled with voters. And I'm extremely disappointed that instead of looking for ways to support these people, this council has chosen to publicly declare that they are not welcome here.
Time.
So for that reason, I'll be voting against this motion. All right.
Alex, calm down. Right, I'm gonna open this up. We're in debate, so I can have the right to ask if anybody else wants to speak, except Stephen and Pauline, because you're in the process already. So can we get a list of everybody who wants to speak on this? And then Stephen and Pauline will come in later. Have we got the list? Thank you. Just 4 people, is that correct? Sorry, this is not the full list. Because didn't Martine put his hand up?
It's okay. I'm going to give you a list. You
Okay.
just start with Joseph.
Okay. So we start with Councillor Joseph Barley, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I recognise and thank Councillor Freeney's comments between some of us younger councillors in regards to our opportunities to own a home one day, which is why I find it particularly hilarious that the Labour government have reduced the threshold for first-time buyers' relief on stamp duty. So, I mean, in regards to what I said last month about enjoying the budget, I guess I was right. But this isn't a case of looking at housing supply on a national scale. This is a case of having to look at the damage it's doing to our local community and the duty that we need to fulfil to our residents. Our borough's already subject to an unsustainable level of development. Now, in my ward, Barkham and Arborfield, we're being bombarded with an array of applications from speculative developers and with another unsustainable proposal approved just last week off Langley Common Road. Now, in the years to come, the local plan is set to have serious consequences for our local infrastructure and countryside way of life. Now, in September, I described the LPU as the lead weight rather than the straw that broke the camel's back. But the Labour government's proposed housing targets for Wokingham are more akin to a freight train. Now, with such a high level of development having already taken place, or already planned to come forward in the years to come, a near doubling of our housing target is not just unsustainable, but as Councillor Charles Margett said, it's not even possible. These targets will force us to suffer the consequence of a mass conversion of countryside land into developed suburbs. Meanwhile, Wokingham town succumbs to increases in the permitted height of development. The fact of the matter is that Wokingham does not even have the resources currently, both through infrastructure and service provision, to adequately meet the demands of residents. Such a dramatic increase is set to make this far, far worse, with gridlock roads throughout the entire borough, whilst masses of residents fight over the few services that are actually available. Now, this does not have to be the fate of the borough of Wokingham. The previous Conservative administration at WBC fought for a lower housing target for the borough from central government, and tonight we need to unite and do it again. The motion before you is our best shot at limiting the harm the government is set to force onto us. We need to work together to combat the blitz of development that is about to unfold in our countryside, our villages, and the small market town at its centre. Everyone in this room knows that a housing target as high as what the government has proposed is set to implicate every ward in the borough with levels of development that they simply cannot afford. Therefore, I ask all of you tonight to do good to your residents, do good to your ward, and protect Wokingham by supporting this motion. Thank you.
Martine Andrea, please.
Can I reserve my right? Oh, no. Oh,
No.
Oh, I have to go. All right. Then thank you, man. Sorry, I got confused. Well, I also share, Charles, your frustration with requirements to build more than 1,300 houses a year in the Wokingham Borough as set out by the latest national policies. But personally, I doubt that approaching the government to seek out an exemption for just Wokingham Borough will be effective. It is highly unlikely that the government will treat Wokingham Borough as a special case and will support a reduction in the housing allocations for just our borough. I believe that a more realistic approach will be to ask the government to consider the methodology used to calculating the housing targets for all the borough councils. It's not just Wokingham Borough that has been asked to build many houses. It's the whole of southeast of England. And I'm glad you're supporting the amendment because I think that will increase our chances in addressing our shared concerns. Thank you.
Dave Edmonds, please.
We stand today at a crossroads where the future of Wokingham is being decided by a Labour government that is utterly out of touch with our needs. Their ill-conceived proposal to raise our housing target by 75% is not just misguided, it's an attack on everything that makes our borough special. This is a top-down decision from Whitehall, driven by numbers, not people, and it completely disregards the reality of life here in Wokingham. Yes, we need more homes, but we need more homes that fit our community, not a faceless bureaucratic formula handed down by Labour. Growth must be accompanied by the infrastructure that will support it. Roads, schools, healthcare, public services. Yet Labour's proposal ignores this, forcing a housing target on us without any commitment to the infrastructure we need to keep our community thriving. Do we want to see our green spaces sacrificed to concrete? Do we want Wokingham to be swallowed up by the same sprawling, overcrowded chaos Labour plans to impose on so many other places? The Labour Party's answer is yes, but my answer, and the answer of this community, is a resounding no. This is more than housing numbers. This is about our community, our future, and our children's future. The plans being forced upon us are impractical, unsustainable, and an outright betrayal of the values that make Wokingham unique. But we are not powerless. We still have a voice, and together we can make it heard. Wokingham Borough's future is in the balance. Let us rise to this challenge with courage and determination and shape it together. Thank you.
Martin Alder, please.
Right, back to my one about shooting from the hip and not really thinking about the consequences. Back in 2010, the regional development agencies were abandoned, they're cut away. That was a policy for development, economic development across the country. Now Wokingham and the South East is suffering the consequence of that policy being ditched on the altar of uncontrolled, unregulated free enterprise. Just to give you an example, as mentioned earlier, that the population growth in Wokingham, 16%, nationally it's 6%. So that we haven't been growing these people ourselves, we've been coming into the area because of the work pressure, because those regional development agencies, which were taken elsewhere, didn't. So we've got the equivalent of the Dutch tulip sort of surge, you know, where the price of tulip bulbs went to astronomical sums, because that's what's happening. You could buy an acre of agricultural land in the southeast for 20,000. Turn it to building land, it's 1.3 million. So that's why people are very keen to build down here, because you can make a walloping sum of money. It's a big subsidy. If you built them elsewhere in the country, you can go into Lincolnshire and you can buy it at a fraction of the price. And there's lots of people in Lincolnshire who would dearly love some of the jobs that are going in the city, the white-collar jobs. They'd love that.
Andrew, have you got a point of order? Sorry, Martin, please carry on.
So the underlying thing is this import of people into the southeast. Now, the problem really is, if you're going to build houses in the southeast, you start off with a one arm tied behind your back because the price of the land is astronomical. So it does need the government to look at it nationally. Yes, the nation needs the houses, there need to be jobs where the houses are, and we need to take the pressure off areas like the southeast where it's just a money-making machine for some people. And building more houses in the southeast is not going to reduce the price, Alex, I'm sorry, but developers will not release enough houses into the market to drop the price. They will just drip feed them. There are loads and loads of land options around here held, which we don't know about, and they are just held back, waiting for the price to be right. And that's what's happening. And there was every square inch of agricultural land or open space will be built on if it could be, because that's where it's controlled. Thank the Norman barons for that, because that's where some of the land lies. It's the people who inherited it from the Norman barons. So we have to look at this in a national problem. We aren't going to be exempt. We're not special. We're not chosen people here in Wokingham. We need to look at this as a national issue and deal with it nationally. So I would recommend this amendment, because we need to push it towards a national solution, not picking off local authorities like us one by one.
Due to time constraints, we have to go now according to the process, which is Stephen next, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Joseph might wish to note that our administration did seek to secure a reduction in numbers by recognition of past over-delivery, but the previous government would not accept that. I think there is general consensus, if not complete agreement, that development on the scale and at the pace that the government is seeking would certainly change the character of the borough forever. Trying to view this from the government's perspective, which I think is the best way to persuade ministers to think again, we can see what I think are two laudable drivers for the increase in numbers. First, a desire to stimulate growth to increase the tax take and address the public finance crisis, and second, a desire to make housing more affordable for those denied access to a home of their own. But it must be doubted whether the government's growth agenda can be delivered by requiring a great expansion of housing in the South East. Martin has given us some very good reasons for that. The constraints on delivery in our area are very real in terms of land availability, and even the construction industry, which of course stands to gain from this, wonders how it can access the labour and materials required, especially when many housing developments across the South East would have to be approved at about the same time. The second objective, increasing the affordability of housing, is also in doubt in an area like ours. Recent experience in our borough tells us that building more houses causes prices to rise, not fall. Our proximity to London means that migration from the capital sustains ever higher prices, while local need often remains unmet. Movement out of London has of course been going on for generations, but it's been turbocharged by the pandemic and new methods of working from home. While our concern is naturally with how the government's new housing numbers impact on Wokingham, if we want the government to think again, and this is Martine's point, we must recognise that ministers will not make special arrangements for any single council. Our best chance of persuading the government is to focus on the methodology used to calculate the target for all councils, not just for Wokingham. The government is far more likely to respond positively if we present our argument in that way. My personal view is very much like Martin's, that the government should adopt a truly national approach to planning that encourages more investment and more opportunity in those areas that really need it, rather than going for the easy and time-honoured option of cramming more market housing into the already overcrowded South East. But in the interests of forging a consensus, as near we can get to it, I won't pursue that point any further.
Pauline is the second of the original motion. You have the right to speak now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to second my colleague's motion and the amendment, asking the Council to fight the new government's housing targets. Labour are proposing to almost double our housing target in Wokingham Borough to an eye-watering 1,308 houses a year. At the same time, they've mysteriously decided to reduce targets for London and other major cities, where the gap between house prices and incomes is much highest. And that's one of the measures they've used to justify the increased targets. It makes no sense whatsoever. The shortage of houses in these cities is much more acute than here. Wokingham Borough, as Stephen said, is within the London sphere of influence, and therefore we've got almost infinite demand for people who live and work in the capital and are able to move out to take advantage of our lower house prices. Therefore, if housing is not available in London, in part because the Labour Mayor of London has failed to meet his housing targets, they'll simply move somewhere else, like Wokingham, where it is. Because of this passported demand, we've seen no evidence that building more houses reduces prices in this area. In fact, the Woking Borough LPU consultation paper says as much. But the whole basis of government policy is that more house building will increase affordability, and that's how they've justified these increased targets. This makes no sense when they're decreasing targets in London and other cities. It also makes no sense to cram yet more people into the already overheated southeast. Instead, the government should be spreading economic growth and housing and people to other areas of the country. We're not arguing against any development. Woking Borough has traditionally been proud to welcome people from all over the world, and we will continue to do so. We have, however, seen massive numbers of houses built in the last few years, many more than we were targeted to do. Unlike London, we have met our obligations. What we're arguing for is a level of development which meets local demand and which is deliverable and supportable and does not destroy our villages and countryside. What we're asking for in this motion is that the Council works with the Government and campaigns to reduce these new targets so that we can protect our residents, cope with the increases and develop infrastructure to keep pace with the expansion and provide sufficient transport, schools, roads and doctor surgeries for our residents.
Charles, as the proposer of the original motion, you have the right to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very briefly, because many of these points have been covered, housing is needed in the UK, but the greatest need is in London, as has been commented by others. We've heard tonight that house prices here, the rapid rise in development, has actually caused house prices to rise. So the answer to getting more affordable housing in Wokingham is not building more houses. The infrastructure is already stretched. To touch on the point Councillor Freedy made, saying we want more housing development, what does he want? Wokingham to look like South London or West London in 40 years? All the reasons that people want to come here now will just change and move further on. And I accept Martine's point and Stephen's point that they both made. I don't pretend this will be easy, because it won't be, I know that. But I think we should try. We're put here to represent our residents. This is a significant concern for them. And if we just sit here silently and accept this, they will think worse of us. So, you know, I said when I finished my first speech, basically, we on these benches are committed to work with the administration where we agree with it and put our weight behind the wheel. And I hope we can work together constructively on this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Right, the amended motion is a substantive motion. Therefore, we go to the vote. All of those in favour? Okay, put your hands down, please. Those against, please. Thank you. Abstentions? Thank you. The motion is carried. Thank you. I think we're at the end. Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone. And the very sad circumstances of this meeting with Paul's really untimely passing. And I would like to extend my thanks to everybody who contributed to the statements made around Paul's endeavours and contributions and the way he worked. That was fantastic. Thank you very much. This meeting is closed.